Open to anyone, all around the world.
What? Are you kidding me?
The Chess.com Global Championship offers the dream of playing against the best.
We are in for a wild ride.
And hey, have we mentioned there's also $1 million at stake?
The total pot is $1 million.
No, that is not a typo. The prizes are unbelievably generous.
We began with thousands of players. Now only dozens remain.
He knows exactly what's about to happen.
Oh my goodness. Yep.
This is over. A heartbreaker for Mr. Svidler. Jan Nepomniachtchi pulls through once again.
The CGC knockout phase has arrived. There are those who played their way in, and some are here thanks to their well-earned reputations. No matter who you are, things are about to get very, very real.
Oh gosh, no time.
Oh.
Can't believe it.
A trip to the CGC finals and a clean shot at the largest first place prize of the year. My friends, it's the CGC round of 32. Who will take the next step to Toronto?
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Chess.com Global Championship. Today marks the end of the round of 32. We have one more match left to play in the round of 32, and what a match it is going to be, with Timur Radjabov taking on Arjun Erigaisi to determine which 16 players will remain in the field. I'm your host, Grandmaster Daniel Naroditsky, and alongside me today, once again, former world champion, Grandmaster Aman Hambleton. Aman, an honor to be commentating with you.
Indeed, Dania. Yeah, former world champion. I just hope no one digs into the archive and looks to bring up the logs. We'll just leave it at
They
former.
didn't know. They didn't know about the Canadian World Championship match in Toronto. You know, that's why the CGC finals are in Toronto. It's actually in your honor. Let's start by reviewing the bracket of 64. We've come a very long way in the CGC. We've had upsets. We have had matches go to Armageddon. We've had blowouts. We've had a little bit of everything, Aman. And after the Radjabov Erigaisi match, we will have 16 players, 8 of which are going to head to the largest city in Canada.
Exactly. Yeah, this is all about that final ticket to Toronto. And we have one more match, Dania, that needs to be decided here. So really excited to get into that today, as we can see what this match actually means for the bracket, as the winner will move on to face Jan.
Indeed, there's one more bracket to complete. It is the Group E bracket. It featured some incredible players. Jan Nepomniachtchi has made his way through Muradli, defeating Svidler in a unbelievably close match that came all the way to Armageddon. And as you're saying, who between Arjun Erigaisi and Timur Radjabov is going to face Jan to round out Group E? It's going to be an incredibly close one, and we're not just saying it. I mean, Arjun and Timur Radjabov, as we take a look at the matchup card, Aman, they've both been riding incredible streaks of late. Of course, Erigaisi crossing 2,700, furiously making his way up the ladder. He's something like 2,730 FIDE right now, and Timur Radjabov doesn't even really need an introduction, but a third-place finish at the Candidates in Madrid really solidifies his case as someone who can go a very long way in the CGC. Is my assessment accurate?
I believe so. And we've also seen how these two players have gotten here as well, right? Defeating Hui Fan, no small task, and the same with Arjun. A very convincing match victory for both. Arjun is, he also had that match against Magnus that he just played. He lost in rather convincing fashion, but he made it all the way to the finals. Similar time control. I think he's going to be warmed up as well, Daniel.
Yeah, I think he is. And I think another indicator that we are in for a barn burner is the community prediction, which was essentially polarized. 50-50. I think it was 52% in favor of Timur Radjabov, maybe because he's the more sort of established old school name, and 48% to Arjun Erigaisi. I mean, it doesn't get any closer than that. And Aman, there's really, obviously, even with matches that should be close on paper, we've seen blowouts, right? One player could be in better form. We've seen Arjun Erigaisi delivering, total blowouts to some of the strongest grandmasters in the world. But I think this is a clear indicator that it is impossible to predict the course that this match is going to take, which is even more reason to cancel whatever plans you have in the next couple of hours. Make yourself a nice cup of coffee and watch the action unfold.
That's right. No, this will be a lot of fun. I think that you pretty much called it as right down the middle. Obviously, a lot of people correctly predicted this bracket, but then from there, it's 50-50. You don't know what's going to happen. It's the last match to determine our final pairings for the round of 16. So a lot is on the line here. That's why we only have one match today, Dania, because this honestly determines everything going forward.
Yeah, we'll be able to focus on each game. We'll And if you don't know the format of the CGC, then where have you been? But for those who might be late to the party, a quick recap of the logistics. The CGC has a 15-minute plus 2-second time control. Each match consists of 4 games, and if the match ends in a 2-2 tie, then it goes to an Armageddon. We've had a lot of Armageddons in the CGC. Most recently, Jan Nepomniachtchi pulling out a flag over Peter Svidler in the Armageddon. And I just love the format. I love the fact that we go straight into the Armageddon. No blitz playoff. You don't have 5 minutes and then 3 minutes. You're going straight into the decisive game. That really caters to some of the most exciting match chess, Amon, that we've seen ever.
Yeah, I think the CGC has done a great job at just making things exciting, right? We have that 4-game match, and then, like you said, as soon as it's tied, there's no beating around the bush. They get right into it, and all of a sudden, somebody's knocked out in the very next game. So guaranteed excitement. I think there's a good chance that this match does indeed go to Armageddon, but you've got such interesting styles between Radjabov and Erigaisi. Erigaisi, that younger player, he's got that fire in him. He plays really exciting chess. Radjabov, he sort of cemented himself right at the top, and I always feel, Dania, that just doesn't quite get enough credit for how rock solid and talented he is to stay at the elite level of chess.
And he's a shapeshifter. You're exactly right. I mean, Timur Radjabov grew up playing the French. He used the French to beat Garry Kasparov. I think aged 16 in 2003. He played the King's Indian against 1d4 exclusively, and he has really changed his style to make it that much more solid. He started playing the Queen's Gambit Decline. And, with the white pieces, he solidified his opening repertoire as well. And that is what you need to succeed at the top level nowadays. But at his core, Timur Radjabov is still the Radjabov who played the French against Kasparov, who loves explosive positions. And I think Arjun Erigaisi is exactly the same way. He's capable of playing very positionally. He has a very measured style, but, he loves confrontation. He loves displaying sharp opening preparation. And I'm really hoping for a King's Indian or a French or one of those gritty openings in this match.
Absolutely. And, if people need a reminder, it's insanely difficult to qualify for the candidates. Some people spend their entire careers at 2750 plus and never make it there. And not only did Radjabov make it there, they came 3rd overall, Dania. So, we're talking about someone who's experienced a lot of recent success at the absolute highest level. And now, going right back down to the bottom of the age category there, you've got Arjun Erigaisi, 19 years old, who's looking to once again, this would be a huge step in his journey as a young upcoming player to take out Radjabov here in the CGC.
Yeah, and Arjun, maybe I'm, inventing stuff that isn't valid, but I feel like there's a new style. I don't know what to call it yet, a new young player style that has been permeating young players, aged under 20. I think Alireza Firouzja belongs to this category. Arjun Erigaisi, his compatriot, Gukesh. It's a style that is incredibly well-rounded, more well-rounded than we have seen young players play at any other point in chess history. Young players used to be associated with, super tactical style, positional errors. Even young grandmasters 10, 15 years ago would often commit serious positional errors, and the older players would drag them into, long, boring endgames or boring positional struggles. You can't do that anymore because these young players are just as good, if not better, at endgames than the older generation. Just look at Alireza Firouzja, who, wins equal endgames on the regular against players twice as old as him.
Yeah, that used to be the fallback plan. It's like, okay, yeah, let me steer away from the tactical skirmishes, and I'm gonna use my experience and technique in the end game. But I mean, as you pointed out, that's no longer a guarantee. So should be a really exciting match because I'm wondering where we're going to find the differences between these two players. Sometimes, Dania, it is the closest matchups on paper that are the biggest blowouts when the match actually happens. So really excited to get into this one. We just saw the players on cam there, so we have both of them with us, and looking forward to this match.
Yeah, me too. And I'm looking forward to the openings. I think a lot of the match, the nature of the match, is going to be decided by the opening we're going to see. I mean, are we going to see a King's Indian,
Right.
French, or are we going to see the openings that Timur has been playing recently? One D4 with white, Queen's Gambit declined, and one E5 with black. That question is about to get answered because the games are underway, ladies and gentlemen. Seatbelts fastened and mandatory. And in game one, we do indeed have a Queen's Gambit declined and a Rogozin by Arjun Erigaisi.
This is a really interesting opening. First of all, of course, the players are so closely seated, but Radjabov, with that second seed, is going to start with the white pieces as the higher seeded player. The Rogozin is I guess slightly more ambitious of an opening to start things off, but it's just got such a solid reputation for black. And as I get that word "solid" out of my mouth, Dania, I see the move G4 on the board for white.
Timur, waiting for you to say that already. A couple of surprises, not just G4, but if we rewind just two moves, this move A3, that came as a slight surprise to me. I think Bishop D3 or Rook C1 is more standard fare, but G4, part of a recent trend, Amon, where people seem to be playing G4 and H4 in virtually every position, and I think Timur Radjabov's intentions are completely clear. I want to give checkmate to the Black King.
Exactly. Like there was a time in chess, Dania, where people did this way before these grandmasters, but the difference was I don't think they did it with as much actual foundation and computer backing as we have now. So it is an exciting new way that people are playing. They're getting it to work. They're finding these G4s, H4s in every position. A3 brought the B pawn closer to the center. Don't take your eyes off the B pawn. It's now sitting on D4.
Yeah, it has come a very, very long way indeed. And the sort of generally approved prescription for fighting early flank play, Amon, is striking in the center. You want to open up the center, then you want to strike in the center, because the logic is that if you're making flank moves, you're pushing pawns on the sides of the board, and we see Timur Radjabov playing G5 anyway, your center is going to be weak. This is crazy. So H takes G5, I think he wants Rook G1, and he's going to win the pawn back. This is still preparation. Which is absolutely nuts.
Yeah, it must be preparation. And the way that he's played it so calm, cool, collected, and the fact that the engine isn't, screaming in either direction, I think also means it's probably pretty dangerous prep. H takes, Rook G1, Knight takes G5, and remember that Queen on D1 is going to slide out to the H5 square. It starts to look really frightening.
Yeah, Rook G1 is already on the board. And at this point, Arjun Erigaisi has a choice. I mean, the most tempting move, I think, for most people, if we can pull up an analysis board, would be B7, B5 to defend the C4 pawn. Right. Presumably, Timur is going to take on G5 with the knight. And as you pointed out, Queen H5 is already a serious force to be reckoned with. If Black plays a nonchalant move like Bishop B7, you can see the EVA bar creeping up, Queen H5. And at first, you might say, oh, no problem. I just go Queen H6. All of a sudden, White trades queens, whoop, Knight takes C6, and the Rook on F8 is lost. And if Black plays Queen G6, then it's still terrible. Amon takes, Knight takes C6, and Black's position is completely in shambles.
That's right. It's so easy for it to go wrong. Ooh, that's a nasty one.
And look at that line. Takes B7, and boom, Bishop G2, skewering the rooks.
I honestly don't think I've seen the rooks get skewered like that ever. Like B7 and A8. That's a very weird one.
You can take on B7, trapping the other rook on A8.
Oh man. Yeah, so Rook G1, I mean, it's very easy to understand prep. I always find, Dania, like, there's different styles of preparation. This one is the scariest to me because if you, sort of in your minds flip the board and observe this from Black's point of view, this doesn't look like something where you're like, okay, what's the next engine move that's coming? You're just looking at it and you're thinking, okay, knight takes pawn, queen h5, and I'm mated. And that's tough to deal with when your opponent's position looks so darn easy to play.
No, that's the most tilting sensation. You know, you watch your clock ticking down, your opponent is still at 15 minutes. There's knight b8 to d7 by Arjun. And I'm very curious what he plans against knight takes g5. We should also not forget that Timur, after knight takes g5 and bishop takes c4, material will be equal. So
That's right.
White is kind of getting this sort of attack potentially for free, which is
Mhm.
sort of a disconcerting thought. He takes on c4 first. I guess there's no hurry to take on g5. That pawn's not going anywhere.
Yeah, the thing is, at any point, I think Radjabov can just switch back and play normal game. Meaning, if the queens get traded, I think White's still fine, right? As long
Yeah.
as he balances out the material, this could just be a regular game. So that's the interesting thing about prep like this is that you're overreacting, thinking how you're going to stop it as black, and then it's like, wait a minute, congrats, you stopped it. But we're still playing a chess game out here, and White doesn't have to full commit to this attack. He hasn't ruined everything in his position.
Yeah, nor does White have to promise that I'm going to checkmate you in the next 5 moves or I'm going to resign.
Right.
The attack, I think White's actually going to switch to sort of a long-term attacking strategy. Maybe knight takes g5, drop the bishop back to d3, maybe bring the queen into f3. White's king isn't the safest. I mean, White has pushed the g-pawn up to g5, but this pawn chain I'm on, f2, e3, d4, is still an incredibly solid one. And White has certain positional pluses, such as a better bishop, for the
Right.
time being, at least.
Yeah, and the king is relatively safe because, I mean, check out the biggest threat to White's king. Black's queen is sitting on h6, a defensive piece at best. So the king can actually probably just sit on e1 or maybe play king e2 at the right moment later, and the rooks will connect on the first rank. So completely agree. I don't think you need to rush. And the other thing is that bishop on c8 might have a hard time getting developed. If you put something like knight takes g5 on the board, and pawn to b6, if we get an analysis board, something like queen f3, exactly. And we're kind of hitting the rook here, and the bishop wants to go on b7, might want to go on a6, but it can't move anywhere. So black's a little bit slow getting developed here.
Yeah, well, b7 is controlled. White is accumulating pieces on the king side, and it's already trouble. You're going to have to go rook b8, and then, as you were pointing out, yeah, queen f4, bishop t3. This just looks ugly for black. I mean, even if you do put your bishop on b7, congratulations. At this point, there are already tactics with knight takes e6.
Ooh.
So I don't like black's position. I think this is phenomenal prep by Timur Radjabov. It's way too early to say, obviously, whether this is successful. And Timur taking really his first think of the game after queen h6. My guess, Aman, is that he is trying to evaluate queen takes h2, which has to be taken seriously.
Yeah, it's really annoying when your queen is still on d1 in these situations, because the move that you would like to make is long castle sometimes, just to connect the rooks, and that's how you defend the rook on g1. But having to defend with a piece, I mean, for example, knight back to f3 is not a move you want to make. Yeah, it deals with the problem, but okay, the queen can go back to h6, and what have you really done? So you'd like to do it in a different way, maybe queen to g4, as you're highlighting, discards the rook.
Although here there's knight f6.
Exactly. Black's pieces come into action really quickly. All of a sudden, the only way to defend your rook might be trading queens. And remember, queen takes h2, Danya did pick up that pawn. So if you trade queens now, you're going to be down a pawn.
Yeah, and that is the worst case scenario. You're going into an endgame, you're down a pawn. And for this reason, if we go back to the live position, rook takes g5 is on the board. I think a big part of it was that Timur didn't want to give up the h2 pawn. And this kind of epitomizes the shift in Radjabov's style. I think the Radjabov of 2005 would have taken on g5 with a knight in a couple of seconds.
Right.
The 35-year-old Timur Radjabov, he plays a little bit more conservatively. And, that's a style that not a lot of people like to play against. Maybe Arjun was excited at the opportunity to mix things up, make a daring move. And Timur says, no, that ain't going to happen. But Aman, rook takes g5 is a very serious downside. Yeah. This rook is very awkwardly placed. After black positions the bishop on b7, you're going to threaten bishop takes f3, and white is potentially going to have to burn more tempi to retract the rook from this illegal parking spot.
Yeah, I really don't get a good feeling from rook takes g5 because one of the reasons I liked knight takes g5 was that b6 could be restrained by the idea of queen f3. Our queen now can never join the action because the knight's in the way, and the knight has to stay in the way because it's guarding the rook. So you get this weird like geometry and like piece configuration. I don't think it works out very well for Radjabov. So I'm actually wondering now, do we just have to move the rook again, almost like rook back to g3? And if that's the case, I don't know if I really like the position. Just imagine a few moves happen on the board and black achieves bishop b7, knight f6. Rook comes to c8, the e4 square is loose, the bishop's great on b7. Suddenly I start to love black's position. So I think Radjabov's really under pressure now. He's created a position where I think he needs a couple really accurate moves here with white.
Yeah, I'm going to go out and say that rook takes g5, I think, is a pretty serious inaccuracy. I think Timur underestimated the speed with which black not only completes his development, but creates concrete threats against white's pieces, the bishop, the knight on f3. We mentioned that white's king is relatively safe. I stand by what I said, but that doesn't mean that white has suffered no consequences for pushing the g-pawn. The structural integrity of white's position is definitely compromised. The pieces are loose, the files are open, and white can't dilly-dally forever. So I think Timur underestimated the speed of black's development and the extent to which it's going to be difficult for white to handle his kingside affairs with this rook just kind of sitting on g5 and taking the knight's rightful spot.
So I have an issue with the queen on d1. I'm looking at the move pawn to d5, strangely enough. I'd like to try to place my queen maybe on the d4 square behind it, and d5 also plays against, perhaps, the idea of bishop b7 in the sense that I don't know what's happening after, pawn takes pawn, and the knight might be hanging on d7, and things get really wild here. So,
of course, 0-0-0.
Yeah, obviously, this is well calculated.
EF7, king 8. So you're calculating EF7, king h7, yeah, queen d7.
I was looking, yeah, exactly.
5, queen h3, draw.
Yeah, obviously, yeah. Just madness there. But the one thing about d5 is that it finds a way to enter the queen into action without having to move that knight. So that's the really the only aggressive move that I would still find difficult to handle with the black pieces.
Yeah, bishop b7 is one move. I suppose knight c5 would be another way to secure the e6 pawn. But I agree, queen d4. There's a pretty scary prospect of white moving the king maybe up to e2, as you had indicated before, and then doubling on the g file. The pressure on g7 could grow unbearable very, very fast. So I really like your proposal. My guess is that if Timur is thinking about d5, what he has to calculate first and foremost is indeed bishop b7. Like this line that we kind of jokingly showed is actually very likely to appear on the board if d5 is played. But Timur, if we go back to the current position, is down to 7 minutes and 50 seconds. d5 is on the board, and you called it, my friend.
Yeah, I think it's one of those positions where if you don't play d5, the other moves that seem like they're available to white are, I don't know, bishop d3, rook g3, and these moves are just not in the spirit of the position. I think Radjabov felt his position was getting a little bit worse, like the tide was turning, and the only way it seems to justify rook takes g5 instead of knight takes appears to be d5 to me.
And the reason I didn't delve deeper into the complications after bishop b7 is that if Arjun doesn't play bishop b7, I don't want to do any bonus work in that position.
Yeah, why would we?
Let's wait and see. If he plays bishop b7, then we're going to embrace the complications and, jump headfirst into the pool. But bishop b7 is far from the only move. Knight c5 seems to be the computer's top choice to protect the e6 pawn, maybe prepare to get into e4. And, suddenly Timur is down to 7 minutes and 50 seconds. And this is after, all of the impressive preparation. So, that's another factor, which we're going to start talking about in about 2 or 3 minutes. We're starting to enter the time pressure phase slowly but surely.
And I don't think he got up to the point of queen h6, which is interesting because queen h6 made a lot of sense to me to get ahead of White's queen ending up on h5. So I thought queen h6 by Arjun was a very like natural human kind of resource to locate. But perhaps had he kept, had he kept the preparation going a little bit further, he might have seen, okay, knight takes g5 is the move. We can give up h2 and those lines we were calculating earlier. But suddenly it felt like he was on his own at the board. Rook takes g5 felt more natural. And now he's in a position where he has invested that time and things will get very wild here. I'm looking at Arjun, and if you're thinking about bishop b7, you're spending a lot of time to calculate it. Otherwise, moves like knight c5 and even knight f6, perhaps, they just feel like less work as black to calculate.
Yeah, that's more like, Soviet schoolboy kind of style, just avoid complications, make normal move. Even e6, e5 is not totally out of the question. Getting control of the d4 square. And Arjun, indeed, putting on his Soviet schoolboy hat, throwing the knight onto c5. And my biggest question is what he intends in response to queen d4. That, I think, is what Timur is probably going to play.
Taking on e6 serves no purpose for White.
No.
You want to leave that pawn there so that when you recapture, maybe with the bishop, that you're hitting the rook on a8. But right now, I think the most important thing for White is queen d4. And if you look at all the pieces, the last piece that just hasn't done anything is that rook on a1. So I want to play queen d4. I want to, maybe king e2 is the best place for the king. But that rook on a1, Danny, I think if it swings over to g1, then White's position really starts to look dangerous, and Arjun has to act fast.
Arjun has two moves, and there's so many things. The menu is vast. You could play bishop b7 and go like rook a d8, but that doesn't strictly prevent White from achieving the ideal setup. If you want to take more drastic measures, you can contemplate the move f6, but that creates major weaknesses along the a2 g8 diagonal. So I wouldn't pay too much heed to the eval bar here. I think that if anything, like if we take the span of the next two moves, Black's position is more difficult to play. If Arjun can solve this problem successfully, then, I'll be the first to say that, the position is objectively good for Black. But can he figure out a way to take the sting out of king e2 and rook a g1, which are two very obvious follow-up moves?
Yeah, I think we're back to the what we were alluding to earlier, where we were saying, this is maybe dangerous or good prep, because from Black's perspective, you're sitting there looking at a position where you can find your opponent's moves easier than you can find your own. And that's not a good feeling when you're sitting at the chessboard and you're like, you almost want to turn the table around. You're like, wait a minute, this position looks kind of nice. I wouldn't mind. So yeah, this does look like king e2, rook g1. If I'm looking at Black's position, I mean, first of all, f6 is the first move that comes to my mind, just to calculate pawn to f6.
Which means it must be correct.
Wait, of course, my instincts are unrivaled and paralleled. Because e6 is defended. Of course, if you played pawn to f6, maybe you want to bring an analysis board because it might get a little confusing here. But pawn takes pawn. Ooh. And, if you go and grab that rook, then I just don't know what's happening on pawn e7, right? And this might get a little weird here.
Total and absolute chaos. This would be necessary because bishop e6 runs into rook takes c5. That's not a prospect that Black wants to allow. But Arjun refraining from f6 and, staying a more conventional course with bishop b7. And this just makes me more and more curious what he has in mind against king e2. Now, Timur could also castle queenside, but I think that would have more downsides than upsides. Black could stick a rook on c8.
Yeah.
And then Black would already be threatening knight b3. So I think e2 is relatively the safest square on the chessboard for the White king right now.
Absolutely. King e2. And it has to be somewhere like king d1, king f1 we're not considering because the rook needs to get to g1. There's no way around that.
Nope.
On takes. And
still play rook g1.
Yeah, rook g1 is very hard to refuse.
96.
Ooh.
That's a sneaky little defense there. So
that's
I
very
think Timur actually has to burn a tempo taking on d5, but then there's like bishop a6 check.
Right.
And things get really messy.
And that was the downside of king e2. Now, look, there wasn't a better place to put that king, so I don't think king e2 was a mistake. But if bishop a6 happens, all of a sudden your king is running everywhere. Like king d2, you're in the middle of the board.
This is terrible. That would be unthinkable. I think rook takes g7 and rook g1 is forced. I can see why the eval bar is giving zeros. I think this line, rook takes, rook g1.
Some sort of
it looks like black gets a kingdom and a horse for the queen, but there is, fortunately for white, a perpetual check. Queen g4 and queen h5 in the classic.
Which looks it's very plausible at the moment.
I think this is very likely going to be the way that this game ends with this perpetual. I think Timur sees that this is in his pocket. He's verifying that bishop takes d5 is out of the question, and it is.
Yeah.
And there it is. A draw in game one.
Yeah, this can't really go any other way, because if white gets ambitious and says, okay, I've got the draw, let me go for more. First of all, you've got 2 rooks and a bishop that say otherwise in exchange for the queen.
Yeah.
And the knight on g1 is not necessarily, entering with force from the g1 square.
It's not exactly making its presence, making the black pieces shake in their, in their houses.
No,
but it's actually Arjun taking his time here, maybe contemplating flirting with a move like rook f to d8, which I think is not the dumbest decision to make. I mean, black currently has 2 rooks for the queen, which you could consider to be a small material advantage. The reason I think Arjun is going to go for the draw, first of all, this is game one. He's got the black pieces. A draw is a solid result.
Yeah.
No need for crazy risks. But the second thing is that black's king is just permanently going to be weak. And if this knight actually rejoins society, Aman, the queen and knight combo is a force to be reckoned with. And I don't think the situation in the match calls for this level of a risk. But
agreed.
Maybe
totally.
he'll make me my words.
Agreed totally. I think that, and we do see the draw on the board, the worst thing that you can do is try to play this on and get ambitious when you shouldn't. And I think it's just a prudent match strategy. Take the points that are available on the board. It is a draw. Both players know it. And go on to game 2, where Arjun will get the white pieces.
Yeah, that was a really, really interesting game. Kind of what we predicted. The players are close in strength. This was a fighting draw. And Timur did his best. I mean, great preparation. I think the critical moment was not playing knight takes g5. And we can now confirm with the engine, the knight takes g5 was indeed the path to an advantage. Queen takes h2, and now simply king e2 to coordinate the queen and the rook. Well, simply in quotes.
Yeah, obviously, queen e2.
Yeah,
or king e2.
Simple. Obviously, king e2 and queen h5. Obviously, you drop back to f3, and it's clear that it's +1.
Of course, you drop the pieces back and remove them from the attack.
How Timur could not have noticed that is really beyond me. But after rook takes g5, a good reaction by Arjun to secure the draw in game 1. He'll have the white pieces in our second match game. And the time has come as we look at the scoreboard here. Only one match today to round off the round of 32. We're going to go on a short break. Ladies and gentlemen, do not go anywhere, because Radjabov versus Erigaisi in our final round of 32 matchup here at the Chess.com Global Championship resumes on the other side of this short break. see Grandmaster Arjun Erigaisi there on your left, swinging in his swivel chair, awaiting the start of Game 2. And of course, where would we be without the top of Timur Radjabov's chair here at the Chess.com Global Championship, our final match in the round of 32 alongside Grandmaster Aman Hambleton. Aman, let's take a quick look at Arjun Erigaisi's player card. He's only 19 years old, and yet his resume is absolutely packed, and his rating is only going up.
Indeed. I mean, one of the things that certainly stands out on this card is the Chess.com Junior Speed Chess Championship. Like, being the champion of that event, Daniel, there are so many talented players that, first of all, are juniors nowadays, but that were in this event. So, to me, that's an incredible achievement in its own right, and you almost don't even get the full picture of knowing who is in that event for him to win it. But any junior championship title, whether it's online, which is more common nowadays, hosted by Chess.com, or even the World Junior Championship in real life, incredibly prestigious title there.
And that MPL Senior Championship that you see is the official name for the Indian Championship. So Arjun Erigaisi has been on such a rampage. I think he also won the Sharjah Masters a couple of months ago. A field that included something like 40 or 50 Grandmasters. And he seems to do it all with this kind of effortless air. He has such a light style. You know, I don't even know how to characterize it, but I think you know what I'm saying. He just seems to be just going with the flow, making natural moves, and before you know it, he's just torn, 6 Grandmasters to bits in a row.
I agree. I think nonchalant comes to mind. The way that he plays, I couldn't agree more. It's as if he's got it figured out, and even if he doesn't, he's not concerned. And I think that he doesn't tilt, and that plays into it as well. You just don't ever see that look of concern on his face when he loses a game. If he gets outplayed, that's just the way it is. He sort of takes it on the chin, learns from it, and he comes straight back with a vengeance. As we see, the next game has just gotten underway.
And we have a Berlin. We have the new Timur Radjabov, who played the Berlin successfully in the Candidates tournament. I don't think that we had a single Berlin endgame in the Candidates. D takes e5 by Arjun. Is he trying to force a draw here in game 2?
Yeah, I mean, if you're Radjabov, you're not saying no to this. This is a really well-known draw in chess. Pawn takes en passant on d6. Queen captures, but he doesn't want to go for it. And Radjabov is probably like, huh? I've never seen this move in my life. What is it?
A lot of people forget that this line has existed for many years. It's a pretty old school line. I used to play this with white. And I used to play this move, queen to d3 in this position. But you can also play a5 and try to clamp down on the queenside light squares. So almost nobody knows that there exists some sidelines in this position that do not involve taking en passant and going for the draw. And Arjun is going for one of them. I'm taking my hat off. I like this.
Yeah,
this is what the world needs more of.
It's really, really nice. First of all, you can know that this draw exists and just pick a different line and avoid it altogether. And then, you might get a golf clap, as people say, oh, that's nice. He's playing for something. But I think you get an extra loud round of applause when you walk all the way up to the potential draw and then say no right at the last moment. He basically is one move away from potentially having a repetition on the board. And, it's a little bit of a mind game. He says, nope, I'm actually going to play this position right here. He goes for your move a5. And, hey, if we see those dark square bishops, bishop on c1 and bishop on e7, if we see those trade off the board at all, white's position is going to look tremendous.
Yeah, gee, I wonder, what kinds of squares Arjun is trying to control with his last two moves. I don't know, a5 and b4. Maybe the dark squares on the queen side. This could be a very dangerous strategy. If you give white like 3 more moves, he stakes a knight on a4, maybe he fianchettos the bishop. As you're saying, if the dark squared bishops disappear from the board, that is an ideal scenario for white, because then white has a complete monopoly over the queenside dark squares.
Yep. So, I mean, black's plan that he's going to be going for is very simple. He wants to castle, get the any safety. I think he also is looking for, in the future, maybe the move f6. So castles and f6 for black. He wants to try to pry the position open. Remember, black is the one that has the bishop pair here. So he would do well to open things in the center. You alluded to this in the previous game, Dania, when it was a little more evident. But here, I think it applies as well. White is still playing on the side of the board. A4, A5, B4. And when that happens, you generally want to open things in the middle.
Yeah, F6 looks very tempting to me even in this position. If we bring up an analysis board, it's not so easy for White to react appropriately to that. Now, obviously, Arjun is still in his prep. I'm sure he has F6 analyzed. Maybe he wants Bishop F4. But an example of how you could get in trouble would be the natural-looking Bishop B2. Oh, let's prepare the battery. Well, the problem that after F5, Queen E5, Bishop F6, you can simply resign because the Bishop on B2 is skewered, or the Queen is skewered. So that's invalid. F4 Amon is similarly bad because after Fe, you have to take with a pawn and allow this type of move, and now your pawn's weak.
Yeah.
So my guess is that Arjun has Bishop F4 in his pocket in response to F6, but we might see this.
Yeah, if we see F6, I think we'll see Bishop F4 really quickly. The move Knight E2 is an interesting one, but I think it's also a little bit that he might want to solidify the B4 pawn, maybe with pawn to C3. And of course, now that the knight's on E2, you can definitely think about moves like Knight F4, and perhaps the knight goes back to D3. So yeah, he does go C3 in reaction to Bishop F5. On the queen side, Dania, I think the game revolves a little bit around, can Black get the moves B6 and C5? Because if he can, then, White's position suddenly looks silly because you've wasted all this time moving all these pawns out here saying, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that. And if Black just goes and does it, well, then none of your gameplay thus far makes sense.
It's like those movie scenes where you put all these objects against the door so the bad guy can't get in. And then the bad guy just gets in through another door. If Black plays B6, C5, I agree completely. And the reason B6 isn't valid here is that after AB, AB, the queen is overloaded. So White trades rooks and then wins the pawn on B6. But that's a pretty flimsy mechanism with which to prevent B6. And perhaps that's why Arjun would want to put a little bit more meat on the bone on the next move. Bishop B3 comes to mind as a way to deter B6 further. But of course, the downside of that is that the bishop could also potentially be required on F4.
That's right.
So White's bishop has a pretty big weight on its shoulders to support the center and to prevent Black's queenside expansion at the same time.
Yeah. And one move that might come to mind after, let's say, White goes Bishop E3, it could be the move A6, but it's really important for Black not to play the move A6 because that kills everything that we've been talking about. All these B6, C5 ideas. No, in fact, A6 is exactly what White would love to see because now there's no pawn advance that can happen without being captured, which means that Black's pawns, all four of them, are basically immobile, and they're immobilized by 3 pawns from White. So that's a real achievement to have your 3 pawns on the queen side neutralize 4 from your opponent.
Yeah, that's a great point. In fact, both sides want the other side to put a pawn on, to be the one to put a pawn on A6. From the opposite perspective, White certainly doesn't want to play A6 because that merely accelerates, the nightmare process of Black playing B6 and C5. So White wants to keep the status quo on the queen side. Black doesn't mind the status quo as long as he can get B6 in eventually. But I think what Timur is really thinking about here is this move F6. I think he's still trying to decide whether he wants this additional source of tension or does he want to keep the position closed and play a more kind of nondescript improving move like Queen D7?
Yeah, and Queen D7 also relinquishes the B6 square. So it does kind of say, okay, I'm not going to go for that plan right now or maybe in the foreseeable future. One thing to keep in mind, look, maybe it's the Yasser influence, but if that rook on A8 ever moves, you play Queen D7, rook E8, how quickly am I now snapping that pawn on A7? Don't think that just because it's there, on the side of the board, I'm not going to grab it, Daniel.
Wow. I remember when I captured Robert Hubner's pawn on A7 and, Robert adjusted his glasses and, in that thick German accent of his said, I lost the pawn. I remember those days. But, it's a tough position for Timur. Not only is White slightly better on the board, he's building up a huge advantage on the clock. Look at the clock situation. 14:46 for Arjun. who's just sitting back in his chair, just kind of another day in the office. I'm bored.
Yeah, totally bored.
Timur is laboring over the position. What do I do? Queen d7, f6. Arjun's just nonchalant. That's the word he used before the game, and I think that word is sounding just about perfect right now.
Because even if this game ends in a draw, I mean, it's a draw that Arjun couldn't care less about. And it's a draw that Radjabov has, worked his tail off the whole game to achieve. So just in terms of the match, I mean, you talk about energy and just like expending energy. Look at what is happening right now. I mean, this is just sets up Arjun for the next couple games as well. I think it's definitely the case that you generally have like a limited amount, and I think Arjun is saving for later games, and he's definitely going to be more fresh when it comes to rounds 3 and 4.
Yeah, we've seen some great preparation from both players. The difference is that this position is a lot less dynamic than the previous one. So if Arjun has accounted for all the ideas, if he has a roadmap for where to put his dark squared bishop, he could foreseeably be playing quickly the next couple of moves as well.
Right.
Timur's got to make a decision. He's down 7.5 minutes on the clock. We're only on move 14. The position is still completely closed. Radjabov is not going to survive a bullet game in this position.
No, I mean, it's more than half the time. I mean, are you really ever satisfied with a position when you have to think about it like this? I mean, there's definitely something wrong with your position. I've never seen this thinking pose. So this immediately tells me that there's issues here. And he's gone with b6, which is really interesting.
He has. Oh, my lands. That is a very serious decision. Aman, I have to beg your pardon. I have to disappear for 10 seconds. I have to get
your pardon has been begged and it is approved. Request approved. The reason that Danny and I were unsure about this b6 move is ironically because of exactly what's appearing on the board. And that's actually an interesting phenomenon that happens sometimes in chess is you calculate a line. You're like, okay, this can't happen, or my opponent can't do this because of this. And you calculate it out and you're like, okay, yep, I've calculated that well. There's no way my opponent can do it. And then that feeling sinks in where they do it anyway. They just play the exact thing that you've just spent your time calculating. You're feeling confident about it. And then they just play it. And that's what's happened here. Radjabov's played b6. And if you look at the position on the board, the rook down on a1, which is, by the way, now hanging, can take the rook in the top left corner on a8. The queen would then take back. And Danny and I talked about how the pawn on b6 is hanging. It'll be a free pawn. And in fact, we loosely discussed how that pawn would just be hanging. And that's why he couldn't go for this. And now he's gone for it. So I was really surprised to see this, but it means that Radjabov didn't really love his position, and he wants a forcing way to deal with what's happened on the board. He doesn't want to sit there, play a long game with the time disadvantage. He's like, let's solve everything right now, and he's calculated something out.
And the other thing I think one has to bear in mind is the sunk cost effect, right? When you've invested 6.5 minutes, even if you start becoming pessimistic about the move you've just spent 6 minutes calculating, you've just spent 6 minutes calculating it.
Right,
so then to play a slow move just doesn't make any logical sense, because then, why didn't you just make that move immediately? And then you're a lot more likely to make the forcing move the longer and the more amount of time you invest on it. So
yeah, I think even speaking for myself, a really bad habit that chess players get into is spending 5 minutes calculating a move, and then 4 minutes into that, 3 minutes into that, you're only calculating one move. If you're only calculating one thing, you should probably play it and then calculate, right? Unless you're considering multiple options, you're just wasting time.
Exactly. So let's pull up an analysis board. Let's forecast how we think the game is going to go. First question: does Arjun have any serious alternatives to rook a8, queen a8, queen b6, and does he even need to find alternatives? Like, what's the evaluation here?
Yeah, I mean, I think you start with the most forcing, and when your opponent kind of hands you a pawn, so to speak, you got to investigate what they're calculating. So queen takes, bishop d3, one of the first things that I look at.
Or queen e3. I guess queen e3 is a more tempo move.
Right.
But Queen 6 and такой. Although I guess white plays rook e1 and asks
Yeah, I
black
don't-
where exactly the compensation is.
And I hope someone has the answer. I certainly don't know.
Where did it go? You see it? It's on the left, on the right. But rook e1, of course, is also possible here. Then maybe black can sneak a queen into a1.
Yeah,
Something like that, could be
can-
what Timur is aiming for.
I can believe that a little bit more.
But I'm skeptical. I think Arjun should take on b6 and call Timur's bluff.
Well, here's the thing. How do you not take the pawn? If you go back to the position before rook a8, it's like, what reasonable way do I have to not take the pawn? I mean, if you go bishop to e3, pawn to c5 will happen. It doesn't matter if the queen for black is on d8 or on a8.
Yep.
It's going to be guarding the d5 pawn, and c5 can happen. And I don't know. I don't really trust any position where black achieves d5, or where black achieves c5, excuse me.
It's the right triangle. This position is totally colorless for white. If Arjun goes for this, that basically means he's admitting that, he doesn't have too many ambitions to win this game, because black will park, even the bishop on e6, queen d7. This is as solid as it gets. And this would kind of signify the failure of white's entire middle game strategy, not to sound too dramatic, but that's exactly what it would be. So with every ticking second, Aman, I think the same logic can be applied to Arjun's decision. It's likelier and likelier that he's going to grab the pawn on b6.
Right. And I mean, I love your analogy from earlier with the white playing like c3, b4, a5. It really is like he put every piece of furniture against the door, and then it just so happens that door like opens outwards.
Yeah, exactly.
Now you just have b6 played, and it's like, wait, what? I could do that anyway? I mean, what else does white have to do to stop the move b6?
Yeah, a5, b4, and I think we hit the nail on the head. There it is. Queen takes b6 on the board, and
Wow.
c5, knight f4 instantly follows.
Holy
So
smokes.
that was Timur's idea, was to play c5 and try to trap white's queen on b6.
Yeah, or at the very least, maybe it wouldn't be trapped, but it'd certainly be a great position for black, because even if we have, the a5 square available, the resulting positions are not going to be good for white, as we see the pawn on c5, even at the cost of a pawn for black. So crucial to get that, because you start controlling all the squares that white wants to use.
And Arjun instantly responding with knight f4. I think he was tired of having to deal with bishop d3. And he believes that after rook b8, queen c7, the queen doesn't have a lot of retreating squares, but it is an incredibly slippery piece. People underestimate how difficult the queen is to trap in any position.
That's
and
right.
if rook b8, queen c7, rook b7 would have happened, the queen would have had the c6 square as well. Instead, Timur, he trades on b4, and now he plays rook b8. Are we heading for just like a mass liquidation of some sort and a draw?
Well, so queen a5 is one of the moves I'm looking at, because I'm trying to get rid of the queen on a8 so that the d5 pawn hangs. So if you go queen a5 and like trade, or if white gets to trade on a8, take on d5, I think we're pretty happy there. Trying to see if there are other alternatives that I would really go for, but it seems dangerous for white to try to play this position losing the b4 pawn. Like if it turns into black keeping the d pawn, then perhaps I get even a bit concerned.
Oh yeah, totally. With a bishop pair, and that pawn could appear on d3 in the blink of an eye. I think Arjun needs to do everything in his power to either keep the b pawn alive, as you're saying, or trade the b pawn for the d pawn. The good thing for Timur, though, Aman, is even in an endgame where there's a 4-on-3 and black is the bishop pair, I feel like Timur should be able to hold a draw there.
Totally agree. That looks like enough. Apart from queen a5, the only other move I'm looking at is queen c7, and there might be some like tactical justifications for how we can take on d5, like queen c7, bishop takes on b4, and knight takes d5, and there's a knight e7 check that I've got in my pocket, knight e6, and the rook is still loose on the back rank there.
I think we're likely to get a kind of position like this, and this is basically unlosable. Given the control the black has over the light squares, the white's never going to get a pawn past f4. with the queen's on, or even when the queen's off. So this is one possibility. I think another possibility is queen a5, and here black could contemplate something like d4, and before you know it, this could get very double-edged. I mean,
Agreed.
I think you called it, Amon. You know, black can keep the d-pawn. The pawn count matters a lot less in these types of endgames, you know, than the quality of the passers that you have.
Yeah, that's a great way to say it. If I'm Arjun here, I don't want to deal with this. We see the time situation evening up completely. So you talk about Radjabov and how it looked like he was struggling earlier. Well, in fact, he may have just been working all this out because he didn't want to sit there and play a long game, as we said. He wanted to simplify things on the spot. He did exactly that. Now, if I'm white, I love the move queen to c7 because it's more forcing. It hits the bishop on e7. We want knight takes d5, and although the queen is also protecting the d5 square for black, it has an alternative job, which is protecting the rook on b8. Unfortunately, that's far more important. So you can't really take back there.
I don't know. I think defending the pawns is more important.
Debatable.
Backering mate. Yeah, I think bishop b4, knight d5 is probably what's going through Radjabov's brain at this time. Bishop takes b4 is on the board. And I'm going to give this a 90% likelihood of one way or another fizzling out into a draw.
Yeah. And we saw that in the last game as well, Dania. Like the willingness to just take that draw from both sides. And in this game, queen c7, not queen a5. I feel like the players, they both know what's on the line here, right? This is the final match of the round of 32. Moving on to the round of 16 would be huge for either player. So they don't really want to take unnecessary risks. They can see the draw as the most likely result, and they're gonna take the safe option here. It looks like in game 2 because it's such a close match, Dania, that just one mistake could swing the whole match.
Oh yeah, it absolutely can. I mean, this is game 2. The worst thing to do is lose with the white pieces against someone as solid as either of these players. One question I'm having though is that after knight takes d5, could black contemplate the move bishop f5 to d3? Is this perhaps what worries Arjun? The idea is to attack the rook, and if you move the rook to d1, I wanted to follow up with bishop b2, and that rook is very constricted. If you have to play rook d4, then you've exposed your back rank. I feel like the pieces are loose. This just doesn't seem like the way to go. Rook c8 skewers the queen of the bishop.
Wow. Yeah, that gets really tricky all of a sudden. And knight takes b4, I guess, doesn't do that much. Yeah, you can take on d1.
But there's this move. This is the saving grace.
And then to move the rook.
Move the rook. Well, the queen has nowhere to go. You have to play queen b7. Well, no. I guess queen b7 loses because now you can, at the very least, take, or rook d8, bishop f8, and whoop!
This is like a wild line. Do they want bishop to a5?
At which point?
Like after knight b6. I mean, they like all computer entities, like all robotic people in the world.
Silicon.
Do they want this?
Oh my God, Amon! You want to know how the line continues? You will not believe this. Oh my God! I have to show this. e6. Bishop takes b6. No, we're not even getting started. Queen takes f7, king h8. Now you play e7.
Of course.
Bishop takes d1. Bishop b2, threatening checkmate. Black throws in bishop takes f2 check to distract white's king. White says, no, no, no. Rook g8, and now the cherry on top. Bishop takes g7 and e8 queen. This is the top line, the top engine line in that position. How do the players not see this, honestly?
I mean, honestly, a huge mistake, if I can point it out.
And then at the end, you go around with a bishop. Unbelievable.
What is this? Put this in Puzzle Rush, chess.com. Like, put that one in Puzzle Rush, I tell you. That'll be very satisfying. Might be the only one.
Yeah. This is like a 3,800 rated problem.
Good Lord. Okay, well,
anyways, I interrupted
we'll simplify things for you guys and say, hey, guess what? That didn't happen.
That didn't happen. Bishop b3 is on the board.
A little more logical. Because the whole knight takes d5 move, Dania, relies on stuff like this. And if you don't see 25 moves ahead, sorry, you can't play knight takes d5 with confidence.
That was just an incredible line. Definitely something to revisit if you're a student of the game. And chess is so unique in that you have these two parallel games I'm on. You have what happens on the board, which is plenty entertaining, but you also have what remains behind the scenes. And that has a certain beauty and charm of its own. You could basically fill entire volumes. I know the late Yuri Averbach, his memoir was titled something like Behind the Scenes of Chess Beauty. So it's just like a parallel universe that you can trace as well. But speaking of the current universe, after something like Bishop C3, is Black not at this point slightly better? Is Black not the one pushing for a win here?
I think the tables have definitely turned. Radjabov is still, I mean, he's still spending his time here. And I think his position is actually easier to play. So I'd like to see him speed up. But Bishop C3, pawn to D4 is lurking. E5 pawn is hanging. Two bishops. We talked about this, Dania. If Black can hang onto that D pawn, I love Radjabov's chances.
Because the red carpet is unrolled, right? You have both bishops controlling essentially every square up until the promotion square. D4, D3, D2. All three of these are controlled by one of Black's bishops. What does that mean? That basically means White has to preserve his control over the D4 square. And that control is very flimsy indeed, because the queen is not a reliable defender. It's incredibly vulnerable. Black has several ways to chase it off of that diagonal. And if I'm Arjun, I'm seriously considering, taking rather drastic measures. Moves like E6 at this point need to be seriously calculated. Maybe Rook D1 as well.
If you want to throw a move on the board, like just H3 or something for White to illustrate your point, and it's probably easier with an analysis board. I was going to say D4 by Black, and actually what happens after D4 might be Bishop takes, and then I was thinking of Rook C6, and I'm trying to kick that queen off the way you're talking about. The only square available is A7 to offer a trade. So you're right, you got to maintain control of this square, but I find the move that we see on the board right now, Dania, to be crazy in this regard, because it does the opposite. In fact, it invites D4.
Queen B5. I totally don't get that. Neither does Radjabov, who has indeed sped up. I think what Arjun's saying is his control over D4 was so unreliable that he actually prefers to control the D3 square. But at this point, his fingers are starting to slip away from the ledge. And I'm thinking about moves like Queen E4. If the pawn appears on D3, that could be an immediate death sentence for Arjun.
Yeah, pawn on D3 is too much to handle. And I mean, so much so that he's played Queen C6. I don't like the move Queen B5 by White. I also don't really love the move Queen C6, although I think Radjabov has a little bit, I think he has a wider berth for potentially error here. Queen C6, while it may not be the best move, look, Black's still going to get the same kind of game. He wants to push that pawn. I don't think there's anything stopping. Remember, once those queens trade, Dania, imagine a bishop on C2. You talked about escorting that pawn. Well, bishop C2, bishop C3, those are the perfect bouncers to have outside your club.
Oh, great way to put it. And I'm thinking of taking and going knight to D5 here, which is indeed what Arjun plays. The threat is a fork on E7. And after Rook E6, do you take on C3? Because on the one hand, it leads to an opposite colored bishop ending. That's encouraging. On the other hand, it allows the C-pawn to entrench itself on C2, where it will basically survive the apocalypse.
Yeah, I mean that's a forever pawn. I don't get a good feeling, Dania, about knight takes C3. Even though it might be the engine's recommendation, I'm not sure. It really doesn't feel good.
The engine is okay with it. The top move is actually Rook to D1, which is not easy to play. That threatens knight takes C3 and Rook D8 mate. It all seems so obvious when the move is played on the board, but my human instinct would be to play F4.
Mere human blunder. An awful move.
Horrendous. It's unacceptable. How dare you defend the central pawn on E5 with another pawn?
Basically, is the move F4 connected with knight takes bishop? Like, if you play F4, are you going to have to play knight takes on C3? I think Black might do well to maybe play the move H5 here. But let's just say bishop E4 is played to attack the knight. I'm just wondering, is it knight takes C3? Because if it is, then I guess that plays into why the engine doesn't really love move F4.
Yep, and also if you combine these two moves, the second rank becomes a major weakness. So you could envision a reality,
Right.
a future reality where black just like swings the rook to a2, and there's a lot of enemies at white's door. There's the pawn potentially on c2. There's the weak pawn on g2, and
Hmm.
bishop e4 is indeed on the board. Knight takes c3, and this is basically 50-50, I think, between a draw and a black win.
Yeah, I think we're gonna see, bishop to f5, pawn to h5. The black king is gonna sort of weasel its way to h7, g6, and maybe slowly try to get in the position. And you called it, the rook looks like it wants to swing to a6, to a2, or even a1, as you pointed out there. So love black's chances here, and I think it's really important for everyone watching to appreciate the engine eval, but not listen to it entirely, because I think Radjabov's chances here are way higher than what's being represented by the eval bar.
I agree. Although I would evaluate this from a human perspective as maybe +2. Something maybe like a 60-40 situation.
Mhm.
Capablanca actually advocated for that form of evaluation in the pre-computer era. You just speak in terms of percentage. Like, what is the percentage black wins? What is the percentage that the game ends in a draw? And the closer Arjun's clock gets to 0, the harder this becomes to defend. Another thing, Amon, that the engine won't tell you is that black can torture white ad infinitum. Like, you could make
Exactly.
50 moves easily in this position. It's not like those positions where there's a 3 or 4 move stretch, and if you survive it, then you basically make a draw. Here you have to
Correct.
survive 50 moves of torture with tons of threats and the possibility of black promoting.
And the engine has this ability where, it's almost like a coin flip. Every coin flip you do is like completely independent of the previous one. So like every
Yeah.
good move the engine has to make is independent of the previous moves. It'll always be able to find the best move. Whereas, for the human playing a position like this, it's like if you have to play 50 good moves in a row, every single one becomes less and less likely that you're going to make.
That's a fantastic point, and not to mention that your time keeps ticking down. The rook has appeared on a4. What is it doing there? Well, potentially it can swing to e4. You can't play king f3 right now because of the pin. That's why Arjun plays h3, securing the g4 square.
Mhm.
My guess is that Timur is gradually going to start getting his king out of the shell. Amon, I don't know which direction he's going to go, to the king side, to the center, but I think black needs his king.
Yeah, the king has to make an appearance. One thing that I love about Radjabov's technique here is the pawn on c3 is not on c2. I think a lot of players would be really eager to get that pawn to a square where it's protected, but look at how it's dominating the bishop. The rook on a4 and the pawn on c3 mean that bishop doesn't have anywhere to go, basically.
Nope.
Right? So it's just
Zero
totally
squares.
dominated. You've got the pawn covering dark squares, the bishop covering light squares. The pawn on h4 is even taking away a crucial dark square. So I love how Radjabov has found a way to control both color complexes with his pawns, bishop and rook.
Ooh, and bishop d2. White hangs by a thread. CD, rook a1, bishop c2. The king drops back to e2 just in time. Radjabov, though, he's down to 23 seconds. I think he has to go back to a3.
Yep.
And we have a repetition here. Obviously, Timur is not just going to yield the draw.
No.
He's got to try to get Arjun to 15, 20 seconds. I think that's a critical step toward winning the game.
Right. Yeah, bringing the king looks solid enough.
Okay, this does look totally reasonable. I wouldn't pay attention to the minor swings of the eval bar here unless it swings to 0. Black has 4 or 5 moves in each position that are approximately equivalent. Bishop before king f5 is coming.
I think this is close to over.
To the toilet, yeah.
Yeah, I just don't see. First of all, the time is going to play a huge factor. You have rook g3, and I think it's resignable.
Arjun needs to try to set some sort of a trap. Ooh, he doesn't play rook g3, but this is plenty sufficient, I think.
I think he might have a game plan in mind. Like, if he goes rook b1, all of a sudden, it's like a frozen position for white. And if he plays rook b1 and trades the rooks even, bishop takes g2 might win the game.
And he does take on g2 immediately.
Yeah, at the cost of his c-pawn, still, I think, he's just chosen a winning path, and he kind of feels good about it. So I think it's all right.
F5, last-ditch attempt by Arjun. It's not over yet, though. That
Not at
H-pawn
all.
still has to promote, and now Arjun has created for himself a passer of his own. But what are
Such
you
a
doing
strong move,
against
King
H3?
G6. Yeah, King G6 so good because you see that bishop just can't handle the H pawn.
No, but can the rook handle it? Bishop G4.
Well, the thing is about this position is the rook is now stuck on the H file, and I don't see what you do about Black's king just entering the game. Maybe G5 happening as well.
Yeah, King E4 also. Again, Black is in absolutely no hurry because once the king moves, the Black bishop is controlling the destiny of White's e-pawn. Oh, that is a nasty move, and a rook G3 would have ended it. As does this. This is resignable. Just don't go rook G3.
And don't go H2, rook B2 because it'll be checked.
Rook B2 first. I think H2 is safe.
Yeah, Bishop D4 is not as tricky as it looks.
No, you can basically go anywhere. But I think King F4. Yeah, or King E6, King D7 is plenty sufficient. Yeah, just rook anywhere and Bishop F3.
He's not going out just yet, but man, what a well-played endgame from Radjabov, who took his small edge, and you and I were calling it, Danny, I think it's just too much. Nasty.
We take these things for granted. You know, we look at a game like this where Radjabov kind of sits back and like, yeah, I'm pretty awesome. We take these things for granted, but to win that position with Black, we thought that White held all the chances at some point. I mean, before Timur played B6, he was 7 minutes down. 7 minutes down with a slightly worse position. He turned all of that around, and he did it in incredible fashion. I think in retrospect, him on the decision to play B6 was flat out genius.
It was a genius idea. And it was coupled with an idea that, I won't lump you in this category just yet, Dania, but I certainly had no idea about the move C5 as the follow-up. That was so impressive. Didn't cross my mind. So strong. It was engine approved. And from there, I think he just hopped in the saddle and he never got off.
He never did indeed. Before we go on break to prepare for the third match game, we want to remind you that the CGC finals, the final 8, will make their way to Toronto at the start of November. The 2nd through the 7th will feature the CGC finals, contesting a $1 million prize fund in Toronto with an all-star cast and crew, especially that third guy from the left. We're going to have, I can't quite make out the name, but we'll leave you to do that during the break. But mark your calendars, ladies and gentlemen. Even if you can't show up in person, everything is going to be broadcast live, state-of-the-art commentary, and all the action you could ask for at the start of November. But for now, we are going to go on a very short break here at the Chess.com Global Championship. The final round of 32 match resumes in just a couple of moments. Stay tuned.
open to anyone, all around the world.
What? Are you kidding me?
The Chess.com Global Championship offers the dream of playing against the best.
We are in for a wild ride.
And hey, have we mentioned there's also $1 million at stake?
The total pot is $1 million.
No, that is not a typo. The prizes are unbelievably generous.
We began with thousands of players. Now only dozens remain.
He knows exactly what's about to happen.
Oh my goodness. Yep.
This is over. A heartbreaker for Mr. Svidler. Jan Nepomniachtchi pulls through once again.
The CGC knockout phase has arrived. There are those who played their way in, and some are here thanks to their well-earned reputations. No matter who you are, things are about to get very, very real.
Oh gosh, no time.
Oh.
Can't believe it.
A trip to the CGC finals and a clean shot at the largest first place prize of the year. My friends, it's the CGC round of 32. Who will take the next step to Toronto?
And we see here Arjun Erigaisi and Timur Radjabov, today's gladiators, in the CGC final matchup of 32. Who will be the last player to make it into the final 16? Well, Timur Radjabov is making a pretty compelling case that it should be him as we review his matchup card alongside Grandmaster Aman Hambleton. Aman, that was an incredibly impressive performance in the last game. Timur Radjabov is just experiencing a years-long second wind in his career.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Total resurgence. But the thing is, I don't think that he's necessarily reaching a level that we haven't seen before, whereas some people might feel that way. This is more of a resurgence because Radjabov has been at the elite for such a long period of time. He's just getting back to where he has been. And you see that match against Ho Yifan. I mean, such a dominating performance against such a strong player as well. And I brought this up earlier, Danya. It's so understated and maybe underappreciated how difficult it is to get into the candidates tournament.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the guy plays third in it. So, I mean, Radjabov experiencing some really recent success, and especially in the rapid time control format, he's establishing himself as one of the best.
He absolutely is. A couple of years ago, he was down below 2,700. Nobody was talking about him. And then during the heat of COVID, he won a couple of online tournaments in convincing fashion. And, you know, he's shown that that has been anything but a fluke. Right. Winning a Berlin with the black pieces, despite Arjun's impressive preparation. And for Arjun Erigaisi, as we get underway here, I think it's very important not to go crazy in this game. And this is where I think Arjun's mental level-headedness, his toughness, is going to shine through. The last thing you want is, you know, to make an irrational decision in the opening because, quote unquote, you need to win and then lose the entire match. You actually don't need to win. A draw is not a disastrous result in this game, is it?
No, it's not. And I think Arjun has the white pieces to look forward to in the final game. So actually a draw might even be the best result here, just to neutralize a streaking
better than a win.
Radjabov. Yeah. Oh yeah, much better. You actually want to draw here, preferable.
Yeah, even if you have a winning position.
Yeah, we saw Radjabov is like he had this prep that looked really dangerous. Now it didn't materialize throughout the entire game, but the point is that Radjabov is indicating he's got some spice to him with the white pieces right now, and a win right here for Radjabov, it puts this match away, Daniel. So if you want to keep this going, give yourself a chance with the white pieces. I think as Arjun, you take your chances as they come, but you don't overpress.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. The current score is 1.5-1/2. A win would get Timur into the round of 16, and it would mean the last game will not be played, which obviously puts Arjun's back against the wall. So we have here a semi-Tarrasch, a relatively popular opening in recent years. This has always been considered very reputable. And we now have a hanging pawn structure, which is another old school, you know, type of structure that's been around for many decades.
Yeah, this, I mean, often you'll get this kind of structure from an isolated pawn position, which is, I believe, what happened here as well. So the B pawn from B2 joins C3, And then you get these hanging pawns where black has really easy and obvious places to put his rooks. You know, rook d8, rook c8. I mean, you just aim right at those two pawns, obviously. But, you know, white suddenly has anchor squares for his pieces, a little bit more space, the e5 square. And of course, look at those bishops. If you add the queen as well, diagonals straight towards the castle king.
Yeah, it's actually one of those situations where potentially both pairs of bishops could be staring at the opposing side's king. For black, bishops on b7 and d6 for white, you know, potential Greek gift sacrifice ideas. Although it should be pointed out, Amon, that in such positions with the knight on d7, the Greek gift sacrifice is virtually impossible because anytime the queen lands on h5, black can respond with a simple knight f6, protecting the h7 square. I think a lot of people get so excited when they see a possibility of a Greek gift sacrifice that they fail to account for any defensive option. They're like, oh, my queen's on h5, it must be checkmate.
Exactly. I think the checklist that I go through in my head, of course, there are always going to be positions where you simply just need to calculate, and there are other resources which are harder to spot. But usually, if number one, there's no knight on f6, and number two, you have a pawn on e5 as white, that's like enough of a checklist to seriously calculate bishop takes h7 right there.
Yep.
So those are the two things I look for. Here, no pawn on e5 generally does mean that black will be safe castling, because the knight can always reach f6, as you said.
That's totally fair. And if black castles, I'll show the line on the board, but Arjun is hesitating a little bit. My guess is that he's, you know, confirming that white doesn't have any shenanigans after he castles. Maybe he's also thinking about a somewhat more flexible approach, such as rook c8. Bishop f4 is another move that is a frequent guest in these types of positions, trading off a pair of bishops. And in the long run, Amon, the more pieces disappear from the board, the more concerning white's pawn structure becomes, especially in an endgame. I've seen a lot of games go south for white. Just because all of the pieces disappear from the board and white is left with these, you know, permanent stains.
Exactly. Yeah, and important that black doesn't just think, oh, I can castle queenside here, because then c4, c5 pries open the entire queenside. So still he goes for the move c4, but definitely this game is going to be about restricting those pawns. The pawns on b6 and the pawns on e6 for black are the ones that keep white's central pawns at bay here. There's no c5, there's no d5 without at least answering the bell, you know, to all these pieces and pawns that can capture it. So I think you'll probably see the pawns stay on c4 and d4 for a long period of time, be supported by the white pieces. And as you said, black's sort of looking for trades, bishop f4. If those bishops are exchanged, the queen ends up on f4, and suddenly the knight on f3 is a target to be captured.
I did make a promise, though. I'm going to rewind really quickly and just very, very quickly show why bishop h7 fails.
Right.
After knight g5, king g8, queen h5, you say, oh, it's checkmate, but no, the knight drops into f6 at exactly the right moment, and h7 is fully protected. So I know people in the chat are, you know, Greek gift sacrifice obsessed.
Got to keep you accountable, you know? Yeah, this
Absolutely,
is not quite going to do it. I like this move.
I like Arjun's position. I actually think that he's done exactly what he needs to do. He's played a solid opening, but an opening where he clearly maintains winning chances. This isn't just a draw. There's tons of pieces left on the board, and it's just, you know, sufficiently double-edged. You couldn't ask for a better outcome of the opening.
Yeah, no, this is like the least drawish equal that you could possibly have.
That's a good way to put it.
But yeah, once again, bishop c3, though, by Radjabov, I want to point out that, you know, while we can highlight how great bishop f4 is, I think bishop c3 is also a tremendous response. And it's difficult to sit there when an exchange is being proposed and actually make the right choice and have that concrete understanding that actually we don't want to trade those pieces right now. Bishop c3, I'd rather defend the center with the bishops. And actually, black's bishop on f4 is now on a square where the queen wants to be. So it's kind of taking a square from maybe where the queen wants to join to put pressure on f3.
Yeah, it's like the boss is kind of looking at its the subordinate and saying, you need to get up from the table. I need to eat my dinner at this seat.
Yeah, they're right there. That's where I sit.
Right there. I need the f4 square. So you could play something like bishop to h6, but then, I mean, obviously you're putting the bishop on an incredibly awkward square, so you might as well roll with it if you're black and just keep the bishop here for the time being. If I'm Arjun, I'm considering moves like knight d7 to f6. Maybe, I don't actually know. It's not that easy to find an improving move here for black. And the move e6, e5 always has to be considered. It's an incredibly committal pawn breakthrough, and it needs to be calculated. But my gut feeling is that it's still premature here.
There is also an idea to combine bishop h6, perhaps with g6. I'm not sure, maybe first or afterwards. But as you're highlighting there, to put the bishop back on g7. And then we have nice pressure on d4. And I always like these ideas that once you have the bishop on g7, black has ideas of playing knight c5 and utilizing the long diagonal from h8 to a1 and the loose bishop on c3. So I kind of like the idea of a bishop on g7. So I would be thinking about g6, bishop h6 for black. The other thing is, how dangerous is the move that's just been played? a4. I mean, white clearly wants to play a5, take that pawn, maybe utilize the open file for the rook to a7. All of a sudden, you're coming in with threats like bishop to e4.
No, that's a great point. It's so easy to not take a move like a4 seriously. And, it's just pawn pressure. I can deal with that. But then a rook appears on a7, and that's when the concrete threats start. Wait, maybe I should have played a5. Arjun decides on queen to c8. Is he considering some sort of bishop b8, queen c7 maneuver? That's pretty sick.
Yeah,
that's the case.
I think that is the plan, and it also stops rook a7 for whatever that's worth. Really interesting.
What a cool idea by Arjun. So he did, I think on similar lines with that bishop on it, where he realized that it was misplaced. And rather than g7, its home is going to be b8. Okay, now Radjabov has to deal with that. That will create serious threats.
You could also say the same thing. While it's easy to underappreciate or not take a4 seriously, I think it's also easy to look at queen c8 and be like, whatever. I'll deal with that when it happens. And then it happens, and you're like, wait a minute, bishop b8, queen c7. Suddenly, bishop takes f3 is a serious move. And if you go pawn to g3, the bishop on b7 just becomes a total monster on that diagonal.
Yeah, hitting the knight on f3, which would become very loose. And in that case, I think e5 would be far more dangerous of a force to be reckoned with for white. So the fact that Timur is spending a good chunk of time here, I think, is a clear signal that he is taking bishop b8, queen c7 seriously. And there's different ways to fight it. I mean, you could try to push d5 at some point. I can't find a way to make it work, though. That queen on e2 is not only misplaced, but it's got to protect the knight. You can't exactly play queen c2 and allow bishop takes f3. That seems unthinkable to me. So it's a hard position to play for both sides in conclusion.
And I mean, I'm kind of fixated on bishop b8, queen c7. I wanted to ask you about the move a5, b5. Is this an idea that black has? Because if you get b5 in and you force c5, that's really what you want. Then suddenly the light square has been really challenging in the middle. So strangely enough, I think queen c8 was multi-purpose.
Yeah, no, this was such a deep move. And bishop c3 to b2 might actually be, among the ideas of this move, could be to prepare a5 and take the sting out of b5.
Yeah.
And Arjun, he's not rushing with bishop b8. He plays the move h6. Kind of a waiting approach, kind of waiting to see what concrete action Timur is going to take and on which side of the board he's going to take it.
Right. I think once he's decided, and I believe he has with the move queen c8, that bishop is retreating, maybe to b8. I don't think he's playing bishop h6. I don't think he's playing g6, bishop g7. So if he's already decided that, then h6 does make sense.
And there's a5 by Timur, which is also totally sensible. I think you hit the nail on the head. I'm on bishop b2. It's now clear that this was prophylaxis against b5, maybe among other things. And there's bishop b8.
So we've got most of the ideas down here, but now it comes down to, okay, white's executed their plan of, keeping pieces on the board and getting rid of that weakness, right? Taking that pawn that was isolated on a2. Suddenly, we're trading it on b6. And if black takes back with the pawn, it's actually black's pawns that are just as weak as white's.
Oh, totally. No, the pawn on b6 is isolated. And if you're Timur, maybe you take a totally positional approach. Maybe you say, okay, I'm going to go rook ac1. And maybe we should wait for him to make a move. But I'll show this really quickly. Rook ac1, queen c7, and perhaps bishop e4 is the way to take the sting out of black's battery, because bishop takes f3 and queen h2 is the main threat that black creates. And with the light squared bishops gone, yeah, this is annoying, but the knight on f3 is a very robust defender of the h2 square. In a position like this, you could make the case that white has a tiny edge because of the pawn on b6. And guess what? Rook ac1 is indeed on the board.
Yeah, and after queen c7, I do want to point out, it's possible that after queen c7, even if black had 2 moves in a row, you're not really threatening to deliver mate with bishop takes knight. It's a check. It's not the end of the world. However, it still looks like something I don't want to allow.
Most people, though, Aman, I think a lot of, and you'll co-sign this point, a lot of people are so afraid of that check on h2. They just kind of assume, oh my god, it's mate. But
yeah, it's mate.
King has an escape pathway to e2. So actually checkmating the king in this way often requires you to control the e file. And with a pawn sitting on e6, that's not very realistic.
Yep. And I think Radjabov has handled this game in a really nice way. He's handled everything that Arjun has thrown at him, whether it's been his bishop f4 move, queen c8 move, bishop b8. I feel like every idea that Arjun has had, and he's been relatively creative thus far, he's had a cool answer to. And queen c7 is going to be met with this cold shower, bishop e4, and you're not getting anything going on the king side. You're not significantly worse, but you're just not getting anything going, and it felt like Arjun was going to get something and be a little bit more tricky than what he's got right now.
Yeah, and it's so tempting in such situations to just sink a ton of time trying to, sharpen the position up again. But I think Arjun just has to come to terms with the fact that this is going to be a relatively quiet position, at least in the near future, as he puts his bishop back on f4. That's a big move. What do you make of that? Is he trying to go e5?
I think he's trying to offer a draw after rook a1 and bishop b8. That's right. Calling it here in the analysis box. Rook back to a1, bishop back to b8, and both players are happy with a draw. But honestly, rook a1, first move that I think of, obviously there's been a repetition, so you know that rook a1 can't be a bad move, but also rook c2, and you just feel a little disconnected there with your rook. They can't really double easily.
Yes.
And I don't even think you want the rooks to be doubled. You actually want a rook on e1. You want a rook on c1. You want what you have.
No, you want what you have. Rook c2 also, I think, makes e5 a little bit more tempting if we bring up an analysis board here.
Right.
The problem is that white's back rank is now a little bit more exposed. So you could imagine, for example, de5, also a move like knight c5. And guess what? That rook on c2 is so awkward. It's preventing the bishop from escaping back toward this diagonal. I think given the situation in the match, Timur is just going to avoid all of this like the plague, and he's going to play rook a1. Or maybe rook c to d1 is the other candidate move.
Right, and rook c to d1, I guess after that move, it makes less sense for black to go bishop b8, right? It's like, then you're kind of like trying too hard. It's like, relax. Not that easy to.
Well, what is black going to do then after rook cd1? A move like queen c7 or knight f6, something like that, I guess.
I think there's there's definitely something in this position right now about these knights that if black plays knight f6, I think white plays knight e5, and white's kind of waiting for the knight to move for black in order to play that knight move for white. Now, if the knight stays on d7, I suspect the knight will stay on f3. But as soon as it moves, I think white's looking to play knight e5.
Yeah, it's one of those cat and mouse positions where essentially neither side has any independent ideas of their own. They're basically just waiting to react to their opponent's moves. And in the meantime, they're trying to make incremental improvements to their position. So the question is, who has more of these incremental improving moves? And I think right now the ball is in Black's court in that regard. It's very, very hard for Black to find one of those. I've heard them refer to as small, little moves. Little improving moves.
Small moves, exactly.
Small moves. Yep, little is the key
word. One, I guess not so small move is Bishop C6 with the idea of like Queen to B7 as a follow-up. So getting the Queen behind the Bishop in a way where it's not Queen A8 because that can always be challenged, Rook A1, but a safe place for the Queen, Bishop. Where then we're threatening Bishop takes the Knight on F3. But move Rook C1. I think there's an indication here that Radjabov is fine with a repetition.
This is where, if you're playing an over-the-board game, you accompany this move by looking up at your opponent with the pleading eyes, and you kind of are moving your head from side to side. The universal kind of symbol, okay, position balanced, let's call it a night, get a beer at the bar. Let's call it a day, please, shall we?
Yeah, and it's also, sometimes you're hoping your opponent repeats like desperately, but even here, I think Radjabov's fine to keep playing as well. Like he knows the position is good here. It's not a position where he's like begging for repetition either. So I think he'd be happy with it. But if Arjun wants to play on, that's fine. In fact, we saw that in the previous game, Daniel. A draw could have been on the board if Arjun had taken en passant right in the opening. He said he wanted to play. Okay, Radjabov is a professional. That's what he's here. He's here to play. If White wants to make an early draw, so be it. But if your opponent's here to play, I feel like he's not very far removed from the game. As soon as it's time to play again, he's just locked in.
Oh, totally. And this is decision time for Arjun Erigaisi. You can just sense the wheels turning in his head, and he's thinking, okay, I can take this draw, then I have a must win with White, but I'm playing freaking Timur Radjabov, one of the most solid super GMs. I mean, beating him on demand is crazy hard. So the question for Arjun is, does this position offer, significant winning chances? And I think given the time situation, he's now down a minute on the clock. The answer is probably no. The answer is probably you should go for the draw, get the white pieces, take a couple minutes to rest and do your best to try to force Armageddon. But we'll see. Nope. He goes for it. I don't like that call. I'm going to go out and say it on record. I don't love that call.
I don't like the call either, but I think that it's also a little bit to do with who he's playing. Like, I'll be the first to admit that in my own games, I can get a little bit attached to a repetition, and then when my opponent doesn't take it, I take that as a sign of confidence that they're playing, and maybe I start to doubt my own position. And I just don't think that's the case with Radjabov. He probably thinks the opposite. He sees knight f6, and he's like, my opponent wants to play on, but I think he's made a concession in order to do so. So he might view knight f6 as like, okay, all right, young gun, we're going to play, are we? Well, okay, you asked for it. And this will be a really interesting game. I love the spirit from Arjun to play on.
Oh, for
sure. Don't like the overall decision, but it does mean, Dania, that we are in for a much more exciting and thorough game.
I'm definitely not complaining. And this is a brave call by Arjun, no question about it. I think the chess gods will smile on him in a 50-50 situation. And Timur is now burning a lot of his own clock, trying to figure out how to continue improving his position. And there's Bishop B1, a mirror image of Arjun's Bishop B8 move. And a mirror image in the sense that the idea, Aman, I think, is exactly the same. Queen C2 and Knight G4. There will be hell to pay if White's queen lands on H7.
And, hilarious to think that we were talking about the queen being on H2 not a moment ago. Now we're nearly getting that queen on H7. So both sides having to deal with the brunt of these two bishops. B7, B8, B2, B1. They're aimed straight at the opponent's king. And also, I know we mentioned it before, Dania, but how quickly did that knight end up on E5? As soon as knight F6 was played, it was snapped immediate. It
was like a group of high school kids when there's free donuts, or in college when they'd announce free donuts in the dorm lobby. They'd be gone before you even finished reading the message. That's how quickly the knight appeared on E5. But Rook C8, that's a good move. Where I thought it was a good move by Arjun, trying to put pressure on essentially one of White's only targets, right? The C4 pawn, which is tender. It's not a big weakness, but it is tender. And yet the eval bar seems to hate this move.
Yeah, it's like, that's a good move. It makes a lot of sense. I really like it. But it's actually a bad move, and we will find out why.
Yeah, it's a mystery to me. It might be that queen c2 isn't actually prevented. Maybe Radjabov should stay the course. And it's important to point out, Amon, that after queen c2, bishop takes e5 only accelerates the defeat, because now the knight has to move and you're getting the queen at h7. So queen d3 is on the board.
This is really nice. And you notice how white's refraining from playing the move g3 as well. It's like tempting. Hit that bishop. It's nearly trapped, but the bishop will capture on e5. And, queen c6 might be a follow-up, getting on that long diagonal.
Yeah, you could have queen c6, then perhaps white can put a pawn on f3. You could envision things getting tactical here with both sides building the queen-bishop battery and then butting heads. Who's going to infiltrate first?
Right.
But, man, Arjun has to tread so carefully, because knight g4 is also in play. Similar idea to smoke this knight out of f6. That is the dream scenario for white.
Yep. Be on the lookout for moves like d5 as well. Sometimes you can even just sack these pawns, because then your knight g4 move hits like a truck with the bishop on b2 also joining.
Oh no, that is like an ideal piece configuration. Every piece doing its part. And Arjun continues to slip on the clock. His time is dwindling. He's below 4 minutes, and knight g4 is a force to be reckoned with. Man, this is getting very, very tense for black. These next couple of moves are going to determine the course of the game, I think.
Absolutely, because you can't all of a sudden undo things. You can't. First of all, there's no draw on the board anymore, so it's like it's not like, oh, by the way. And I'm actually surprised that the move h5 hasn't like just broken the eval bar and it's not just shot up.
Yeah, it's led to a
oh, h5 force mate.
Yeah, queen h7, knight g6. But the idea is crystal clear. He's stopping knight g4.
It makes so much sense. I mean, really obvious. But the move h5 feels so loose, right? All of a sudden, that h-pawn is there, and you can't really... I mean, sometimes you could play the move g6, but oh boy, that move looks scary to connect all the pawns like that.
That pawn shell does not look like it would withstand a magnitude like 1.5 earthquake. But the other benefit of h5, Amon, is that now after g3, bishop takes c5 might be okay, but black can also drop the bishop to h6. So this has created a little bit of luft for the bishop, and it's getting Timur Radjabov to spend a long time. That knight on f6 is suddenly public enemy number one for white, and it's very hard to smoke that knight out of its shell with knight g4 no longer possible.
Yeah, that's a really key resource that's all of a sudden just not available. Suddenly I'm wondering, okay, how does white proceed? The move d5 loses a bit of its sting because there's no knight g4. There's no place to put that piece afterwards.
Yeah, and after e takes d5, the knight on e5 simply hangs. Like you said, knight d7, you could get away with a move like that, but that's not Timur's style, and that does not look like a recipe for success in a game where you're perfectly satisfied with the draw. So I think what Timur is looking for is a way to keep the status quo. He waits for me to say this, and then d5 appears on the board.
Gotcha. I was thinking d5, if takes, I actually think we want to just take it back. And then perhaps we unleash moves after that, whether it's like knight g6 or really knight almost anywhere, with the idea of like getting rid of the knight on f6 with the bishop. The d5 bishop will be loose, and perhaps go from there.
So after ed, if we bring up an analysis board, you want to take back?
That was my first instinct. But do you have another move? Oh,
I also thought this was the way to go. I thought that white could play rook e5, and d6 and win the rook back, but this fails on several fronts, such as queen c6.
Queen c6 is the best one. Yeah, that's just the most obvious to say, hey, nothing works for you because mate on the board is happening. So now I'm back to puzzled.
So you have to defend the knight and preferably attack the bishop at the same time. Is there a move that checks the boxes? Queen f5 maybe. Like you're saying.
I mean, that's a great cookie cutter stencil way to get me to find the move. It's like, I need to attack the bishop and defend my knight. Well, you don't say, Daniel. Queen f5.
Perhaps, and that is on the board, Timur Radjabov. I mean, he's so multifaceted now, right? He's positional, but what he's showing in these last couple moves, that he's not just going to shy away from complications just because, oh, it's tactical and I'm okay with a draw. He's going to play the position.
Exactly.
Alexa and I know.
Alexa is like ready to chime in because I think maybe you know, any computer program these days, it's got a few chess lines programmed in as well. Probably spots the wind.
Yeah, I should ask Alexa what Timur Radjabov should play in this position. Bishop h6. Uh-oh, and now it's the eval bar shooting up.
Well, I mean, take your pick, Dania, because at this point, we can see the ingredients, right? Queen on h7 is going to be checkmate. Queen h7, queen h8 mate, as long as you can just get rid of that f6 knight. And h6 just doesn't do anything.
I love c takes d5. That just shows such restraint. He isn't playing knight d7. He's not taking on f7. He's just saying, my position is so superior because of the way my pieces are placed. I don't need to rush. I can recapture the pawn. And if black plays bishop takes d5, then obviously rook takes d5 and queen h7. And knight d7 is game over. Red Rover.
Oh, that is. And look how quickly he played it, right?
Yep.
He's just handing the ball back to Arjun and saying, I mean, I don't see a single move for you. You could not place any of White's pieces better than they currently are.
No, this is literally perfect piece placement. He needs a couple more moves to finish this off. You can see the evaluation, but it doesn't tell the whole story. This is the kind of +5 that I could totally envision turning. You know, I could see the tables turning if White doesn't find a way to stick the queen on h7 in the next couple of moves.
I can see a few moves that I don't really have answers to for Black. One of them that came to mind, honestly, was like knight c4, like a move like that. Just as a, knight c6, knight c4. The more direct one that I really want to calculate is knight f7. That's the move that looks really frustrating.
For me, knight c6 strikes me as the most natural, mostly because not only does it threaten bishop f6, but it also contains the idea of knight e7 in certain positions.
Right.
And he plays it, but the eval bar shoots back down. Why?
Yeah, exactly. Why? You know, the thing about knight c6 that I agree with from what you were saying is that it doesn't give anything up, right?
No.
You're not committing anything. So if things don't really work out the way that you've been calculating, you're not in trouble afterwards. Whereas if you play something like knight f7, it's like, hey, if that doesn't work, you might lose this game.
Yeah, I mean, I have no idea what Black's saving resource is. Arjun has 40 seconds. If he's able to save this game, I will become an Arjun fan for life. You know, like this is a Herculean task with an hour on the clock, let alone 36 seconds. And King F8 was not the way.
No, I mean, there's a
h7.
Yeah, so after that, queen h8 is the threat, but g5.
So g5.
Oh my god. Reminiscent of a resource Caruana missed in another one we were commentating.
Ooh.
That is a crazy, because you only think of g6.
Yeah, you only think of g6. That drops the bishop because it severs the tie between the queen and the bishop. But also, the possibility of White putting the bishop on that diagonal was dangerous. So Arjun gives away the exchange in a last-ditch attempt to extinguish the flames of the attack.
Yeah, you have to give that up. But, you know, remember, this isn't like a bullet game where Black has chances with the two bishops. This is like, no, you're just down material.
You're down in exchange. The attack rage is on. You've got 20 seconds. It's never over till it's over. It's never over till the fat lady sings. But
Wow.
Come on, this is looking real grim for Arjun.
Yeah, because I mean, I think you could maybe just go knight c4, like a kind of simple style move. Just to look to trade pieces, mobilize that d pawn, and if things trade, it looks like it does so favorably for White. So that's my first move that I know I have if I can't find anything better.
Two more plays it. And I think it's a very good practical decision, even though the eval bar, maybe not the best, maybe not the clinical option, but trade queens, enjoy your life, torture Black for the remainder of the game. And this is almost reminiscent of the previous game where hypothetically, does Black have drawing chances? Yes. you have drawing chances with 20 seconds, and white with the possibility of torturing you for the next 50 moves? Not really.
Right. So this is let's not forget, this is Arjun playing for his his life in the tournament, right? In the global championship, it's a knockout, so he at this point needs a draw to even put himself in a position to need to win the next game.
Yeah, it's not like he draws and anything happens. Like, he's still down a point.
Exactly.
And Radjabov trying to trade a pair of bishops, I think that is the next step for white. Get rid of black's bishop pair, reduce the activity of black's pieces, and Timur just kind of bringing his pieces back to home base, unwinding the machinery. It was like the scene at the candidates tournament after commentary finished, powering down the computers. The attack's over. We can now enjoy our life.
No, I was going to say takes on e3. Rook takes d3 would be a cold shower there.
Does Arjun want to take now? Is that a reasonable idea?
Such a tough choice. My feeling is yes.
It does.
Especially given the time.
On F6.
But can you do that right away? You're going to lose the G pawn, or maybe?
Oh, yeah, rook b8, rook b7. I agree, that's bad. There are drawing chances here. That knight on e5 is a pretty darn good piece. Can you set up some sort of a fortress? And can you do it with 6 seconds? G5? Okay, f6.
Yeah, I think...
Whoa!
This is getting... I don't like g5, h4 for black. I feel like that really helped white's chances.
Well, that pawn is a sitting duck, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think bishop d5 and bishop f3 is the simplest maneuver. Or this. Just trade the bishops. Nah, this is losing. I think you can trade, but I don't know. I wouldn't risk it if I'm Timur. I think he will.
Look of concentration on both of these players' faces says it all.
If you're Radjabov, Amon, the last thing you want is to miss a fork. Rook takes c5. I think that wins.
Oh, that's such a 6
seconds.
seconds.
He's calculating it. No!
He doesn't quite have it worked out. He wants to repeat once, get back to it.
Okay, he's gone king g5. This is completely winning. You just have a passed d-pawn. You're pushing it forward.
That has to be enough.
Unless he misses a fork, the game is over.
Agreed.
It's always possible to miss a fork. Always.
It's truly always.
Like, it doesn't matter what position you have.
Or how good you are.
King f4. He's calculating rook f7.
Can you take it?
Works.
And g3?
I think e5 is good enough.
Yeah, e5.
God, that's such a gutsy. That's so gutsy with 4 seconds left. Oh, he blundered.
No, but g3.
G3.
He needed g3. Oh my God, what a save.
Oh, the match continues.
Unbelievable. And pawn to h3.
H3 on the next move.
Pawn to h3 is a key move.
Holy smokes. So
what
the decision
a save.
to give up the exchange turns out to be the downfall. Unreal.
He could have ended the match right there, and you see Radjabov, the head shake as he is now rewinding the clock in his head, and he just saw it. That's the look, Daniel, when it's like, oh my goodness, I just needed to play pawn to g3.
That is unbelievable. We need to bring up e6 is such a natural move. You think it so. I thought it was over after e6, but h4 is a brilliant resource by Arjun, deflecting the king. It turns out, Amon, when you push pawns and pawn endgames, they become weaker. And king f6 locks out white's king, wins the pawn back. The move, as you expertly called, was indeed g3 to prevent h4, force black to make a move, and now come around to h6, shouldering black's king out of the way, and reaching a winning pawn endgame. Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, what have we not seen in the CGC? Now Timur Radjabov has to gather himself mentally.
Amazing.
And Arjun Erigaisi with the white pieces has a new lease on life. Will he be able to make it count? Will he mount one of the most shocking CGC comebacks of all time? Or will Timur Radjabov stay solid and hold his own in the final game? We will see. We'll let the players take a breather, and we will take one ourselves. You're watching the Chess.com Global Championship, and we will be back with the 4th and final match game of the final matchup of 32 on the other side of this short break.
open to anyone, all around the world.
Are you kidding me?
The Chess.com Global Championship offers the dream of playing against the best.
We are in for a wild ride.
And hey, have we mentioned there's also $1 million at stake?
The total pot is $1 million.
No, that is not a typo. The prizes are unbelievably generous.
We began with thousands of players. Now only dozens remain.
He knows exactly what's about to happen.
Oh my goodness. Yep.
This is over. A heartbreaker for Mr. Svidler. Jan Nepomniachtchi pulls through once again.
The CGC knockout phase has arrived. There are those who played their way in, and some are here thanks to their well-earned reputations. No matter who you are, things are about to get very, very real.
Oh gosh, no time.
Oh.
A trip to the CGC finals and a clean shot at the largest first place prize of the year. My friends, it's the CGC round of 32. Who will take the next step to Toronto?
As we look at the Group E bracket, the only one remaining to be filled here at the Chess.com Global Championship, we've seen some crazy stuff in every bracket, but especially in this one, an unforgettable match between Nepo and Svidler, and now Aman, and another epic match to round off the bracket. It seemed all but decided. Radjabov wins game 2. He's winning game 3, a beautiful positional game to outplay Arjun Erigaisi, and then just when the death knells seemed to be ringing, the unthinkable happened, and Arjun saves the draw.
That's a perfect summary and another reminder that, Daniel, this is the Global Chess Championship, right? The point of this entire event is unpredictability. We can't get out of the round of 32 without another match that we have no idea what's going to happen in. And it looked all too easy. It was too routine. And I say the word routine because that might be exactly the trap that Radjabov fell into, being too routine in that endgame conversion. That's a reminder that in chess, you always have to calculate to the very end of the line. Nothing is as easy as it seems. What a resource by Erigaisi, who hangs on and stays in the match by the skin of his teeth, but needs to win on demand here to continue the Cinderella run.
Yeah, a lot of people would have probably considered resigning in that position. It was demoralizing, debilitating. He was getting crushed for the last 25 moves, and just to stay in the game, to have the alertness to figure out that resource with his last seconds is nothing short of amazing. And it is the reason why Arjun, part of the reason why he's had such impressive growth. His resilience is second to none. But you're right, Aman. What's the reward that you get for that impossible save? Well, now, yeah, you've got the white pieces, but you have to beat Timur Radjabov on demand, one of the most solid players of all time. Somebody who did not lose. Wait, did he lose a single game with the candidates? I don't remember him losing.
No,
I think he might have, but the fact remains he's unbelievably solid, and he's obviously going to play one of the more solid openings in his repertoire. We have a Carlsbad variation of the Queen's Gambit Declined on the board.
This is interesting because a lot of recent work, I think, has been put into this opening at the top level. So it's interesting to see the developments. But I actually like the opening overall by Arjun as a try for a win. I think it's a very double-edged opening. A lot of pieces remain on the board. It's not very easy to just trade everything off unless you really try to force this one concept of knight to e4 for black. So knight to e4, and then you're looking to trade the dark square bishops. You're looking to maybe trade the knight in the center. But white's plans usually revolve around the unorthodox development, knight g to e2. This allows for the pawn to creep up to f3 and potentially a central expansion with e4.
Yeah, this f3 e4 plan has really existed for many decades, since the time of Botvinnik in the 50s. I think he was one of the pioneers of this system for white. Previously, white had been automatically putting the knight on f3. Black, for his part, has a bunch of possible ideas. First of all, e4 is not the end of the world, even if this move is played. It comes with a pretty hefty price tag. It weakens a lot of squares on the king side and the center, and scratch everything, because white has castled queen side, and you certainly do not see that every day in this line.
No, you also don't see the the requisite result of a win necessary by the white players every day in this line, and I think that is the biggest contributing factor to the move long castle, where the ideas remain the same, but we also have an additional plan of g4, h4, and a kingside attack.
I think that might have even overtaken e4 in terms of likelihood. Now, for Timur, he's got no time to waste. You have to counter strike on the queen side. And typically in such positions, you have two ways of doing it. You can take the standard approach with a pawn storm, or you can try to open files with a timely c6, e5, although that's an incredibly risky move because it weakens the d5 pawn severely.
Right. And although there's been a commitment to the queen side here, white can pivot and just play a positional game as well. If you play c5, hang on, the rook's already on d1. It's like perfect to attack that d5 pawn. So white hasn't done anything too crazy yet that indicates black can just, sacrifice all positional understanding that he has and just go all out here. I think white can just play king to b1 and still play this game in reasonable fashion. I don't think that's what he's going to do, but it was available.
This is an old school opposite side castling, like b5, g4 kind of game. Where neither side is trying to be creative. Both sides are just trying to go for their opponent's throat. The logistical difficulty, though, Aman, in terms of black's attack, is that if you play b4 prematurely, the knight's going to stick itself on a4. You could even play b3, and it's going to take, 1,000 pounds of weight to break through the defenses. So if you're Radjabov, you have to be very strategic about exactly how you storm the queen side with your pawns. Maybe you start with a5 and a4 instead of rushing with b4.
Yeah, and also the move knight e6, while it looks so natural, it actually does drop a pawn. Bishop takes the knight on f6, and bishop takes on h7. Knight e6 looks so easy to play. You want to get that knight in the game, gain time attacking the bishop, maybe support c5, but you can't really do that. Also, the move knight e4 that I mentioned earlier isn't available to maybe get some trades in. So black is left with a situation where there's no easy moves to make. There's no vacuuming all the pieces off the board. I don't think you want to play the move pawn to h6. That just looks like a target. So he's going to have to be creative and play some other moves. Queen a5 on the board. Are we looking at b4, bishop a6 kind of stuff?
Yeah, possibly. Maybe b4 and c5 he's trying to sneak in. But the fact remains, b4 can be met with knight a4, and that is a pretty major worry to me in regards to black's the prospects of a successful attack on the queen side. How is black going to solve the problem of the white knight appearing on a4 in response to b4?
Yeah, and with the queen on a5 as well. Any thoughts of pawn a5, pawn a4 first? Out the window. Nope. That's no longer possible. I'm also really looking at the move king b1. I'm attached to this move. I really like it. White can also continue knight b1, knight c1 to b3 after that. If you need an extra defender there, or as I've been saying, you can kind of pivot and play a little bit more positional as well against the c5 square and the c6 weakness.
Yeah, it should be pointed out, just like in the first game, that you're not signing a contract that demands that you have to play h4 with white, and you must make only attacking moves. You haven't sacrificed anything. Your king on c1 is far from safe, but it's also far from being imminently checkmated. So moves like king b1 are hard to play for a lot of players who start to get anxious in these situations and feel like every tempo's golden. I have to push my pawns. That's not how you attack at a high level. At a high level, you combine positional moves and tactical moves and attacking moves and defending moves. And the player who finds the right combination of all those types of moves ultimately prevails.
That was really well said. I liked. It was almost like you dropped a riddle for us there. I am far from safe, but I'm far from danger. Where am I? Actually, you're a king on c1. Yeah, that's exactly what you are.
Yeah, I moved to b1 to become safer. And h4, speaking, I mean, obviously, I wasn't trying to suggest that, we're not going to say h4. I just, it was a matter of time, and it's not forced. But a pawn does appear on h4. And there's another question to be asked, which is where is white going with his attack? Because, even if you play h5 and h6, black can respond with g6. So, Aman, The black king, surrounded as it is by a defensive cocoon, is also not easy to approach.
It's not. I love the way that white has done things so far. I think that the move b4 for me has a really natural reaction of knight a4. So I'm really comfortable here with the white pieces because again, g4 h4, you haven't done anything too crazy just yet over there, and I still see just positional glaring weaknesses for Radjabov, and I'm not sure how he's going to continue with that pawn there. Like, you want to sacrifice it, maybe get a rook to c8. I'm not even sure you're going to get that far.
Nope. And I think b4 might have been a bit of a panicky kind of move by Timur. He also has to avoid falling into the cycle of thinking, hey, why am I in this situation to begin with? Like, all I had to do was make one move, and I'd be enjoying, a glass of champagne right now, getting interviewed, and I'd be in the round of 16. Once you start getting into those negative thought cycles, that interferes with your thinking, and even the top players are not immune from it. But c5 is indeed on the board. Okay.
Wow, that's an amazing amazing move there, because first of all, I mean, now that I see this, I'm looking in hindsight and saying, okay, it'd be nice to have my king on b1. Guarding the a2
really
pawn, knight takes c5 right now. I believe that's the intention. Queen takes a2. Question is, I mean, is that really anything to be too scared of?
No, I don't think black should hang his hat on the fact that he's taken a2, because white's king, as in the previous game, right, we were talking about queen h7 or queen h2 not being as lethal as it appears. I think we've got a similar situation here. White can escape to d2 on demand. Maybe he should do it now, or maybe you should start with a more solidifying move like, I don't know, queen b3, maybe knight f4. There's a lot of candidate moves here.
I was looking at, I don't think it's quite there yet, but I was looking at some funny ways to try to trap the queen, like bishop b5 and knight b3. And it's like, you're kind of somehow managing to trap the queen there, but king d2, obviously with the same intent. And the hilarious thing about this position is, of course, the queen being trapped, you're probably going back, queen a5. And then if white plays some of the moves you're suggesting, rook a1, the queen goes back even more, and white's king has now got back to the middle of the board. The rook's gone back to the square on a1 where it started.
Yeah.
And it's almost like you're undoing everything, but somehow your position has improved.
Yeah, if you play king e1, then you have fully uncastled. But white's not going to do that. White's going to stay on d2. And that pawn on f3 is really, I think, incredibly important, because it's restricting the knight. It's also restricting the bishop by protecting g4. And by protecting the e4 square, it's ensuring the long-term safety of white's king. No question that black's attack has backfired. Can Timur find a way to, first of all, evacuate his queen? That's the first order of business. But then find some way to whip up play against white's king in the center.
So if you want to bring up an analysis board, we can put a sample line of how things might proceed. I think after king d2, queen a5, and then rook a1, and then if queen c7, knight a6, just as an example.
Okay.
And if the queens trade in this position, because it looks like they're kind of forced to, this is back to what I was saying before, is that all of a sudden you realize white has never had this prerequisite to like attack or checkmate in this position. White is dominating positionally, and he'll be totally fine to play this position as he's got full domination here. b4 is hanging, c7 is loose. I mean, every piece for white is so well placed, and this is just a disaster for Radjabov.
Yeah, and just showing how you could end up losing the b pawn and then probably also losing the d pawn. I think your point is incredibly well taken. It's so important to realize that white hasn't actually made any commitments. And by the way, rook a1 was played, and precisely because of knight a6, Timur drops the queen not on c7 but on b6. And I think his top priority is probably to try to get rid of this knight, maybe throw in knight e6, even at the cost of a pawn. I think you're that desperate.
I think it's in that territory here, as we see the move rook h to c1.
But okay.
And everybody's swinging to the other side now.
Yeah, it's all about the queen side. And little would you know 5 moves ago that it would be white putting pressure on the queen side. And maybe black will start playing on the king side before you know it, attacking these pawns.
Yeah, exactly. Queen B8, Queen H2. Gotcha.
Exactly. H6, there it is.
Oh, there
See, black is no longer afraid of making a... This move would be unthinkable just 5 moves ago. White would take on F6 and go G5 and checkmate you.
Actually,
now the rook's no longer an H1.
What a weird game. As yeah,
really
he's not
is.
interested in giving up the bishop for no reason, as the bishop would take back on F6.
I see a hilarious line I'm on. Knight
All right,
E6.
what do you got?
Knight takes C6. And if you play bishop takes C6, bishop C7, queen B7, bishop A6, the queen is trapped.
That's ludicrous. Yeah, what a pretty
take.
trap. What a pretty trap.
I could see somebody blundering that, because you could be so fixated on the knight on E6, you think your queen's out of the woods, but
yeah,
just when
because that's probably why you played the move H6 to get the pawn off H7, so it wouldn't be hanging, so you could finally play this move Knight E6 and free yourself. And it's been played.
It's on the board. Do not tell me he's going to take back with a bishop.
But the thing is, the other move. First of all, it's got to be the queen then, right? Because
it has to be the queen. But that's
if the pawn takes, it's the same thing.
If the pawn takes, it is the same thing.
But if queen takes, here's the thing: White could even play the worst case, queen C6, and I think it's just an overwhelming endgame for White.
Oh, it's a terrible endgame. Weak pawn on D5, total domination on the queen side. Those queen side pawns have bitten off more than they can chew. I think Arjun will take on E6 and he will pray for a quick end to this game.
I've never, first of all, I mean, the match overall is quite something, but this specific opening, I don't think I've ever seen it go in this direction where you lose the A2 pawn, vacate the king to the middle of the board.
Yeah,
I've seen a lot of games in the Carlsbad structure. I've never seen this.
Well, like 5%, it's like those statistics, like 5% of X gets into Y, and then, 2% of that and 1% of that. Like maybe 5 to 10% of Carlsbad games even feature queenside castling. White castles kingside in the vast majority of games. And of the games where White castles queenside, as you're saying, the situation where White ends up being the one who attacks on the queenside himself is exceedingly rare. But that's why I love chess. Like, this is how rich the game is. Like, we've seen so many Carlsbad games, and even within this well-studied structure, you could basically have a completely new game structure. Why is he not taking on E6 yet?
I really don't know. So the other, because I don't like losing the dark square bishop. Knight takes F4. Like, in general, if that happens, I'm not feeling great about it. The only other moves to consider are knight moves, it seems like, in the other direction, knight A4, knight A6, but I just don't like giving away that F4 bishop. So I'm really only considering stuff like knight A4 here.
Yeah, knight A4, I guess you're forcing the queen to move back, maybe to D8.
Right.
But then somehow it feels like White needs to cash in this knight. And knight takes C6 is a great way to cash it in, because you're forcing black to recapture awkwardly. And you're opening up the C file, which is ultimately, the main artery through which White is going to access black's position.
Yeah, the thing about knight takes knight is that if I look at all black's pieces, the most annoying one is the knight on E6 by a landslide. So I'm actually getting rid of one of my opponent's best pieces in doing
so. He missed it! Oh my god, he blundered it! But here's the thing.
It's on the board.
It's unbelievable. Bishop C7 wins the game. Now, after Bishop C7, Aman, black does have the move B3, but that leads to a completely hopeless endgame. Bishop C7, B3, you take on B6, you take on A7, and black can resign because he's dropping 2 pawns. It's on the board.
I can't believe that. I think
goodness.
Radjabov is so rattled from this mistake in the previous game. The match should be over. I feel like everyone at the table right now knows that, but Arjun is he has that knowledge and he's using it to his advantage. He's using it to fuel him in this game. Radjabov, I think he's thinking about it and it's hurting his calculation, his decision making.
Oh yeah.
And this has been a sloppy game from his perspective. He just won't be happy with how this position has gone. It's been, you start to finish, a great chance for Arjun with the white pieces to get a win on demand, and the way he's executed it has been brilliant so far.
No, taking nothing away from Arjun, the guy is a beast. The way he resisted last game, the way he's played this game is he's played it like a professional. He's played like Magnus Carlsen, who's just like winning on demand in 23 moves. But at the same time, I think you're absolutely right. This was an un-Radjabov-like game with Black. He just doesn't lose games like this in 20 moves. He doesn't make blunders like Bishop C7. The way he was attacking on the queen side of Mon, it seemed that he played B4 and then he started thinking after knight A4. Rattled, I think, is the best way to describe the way that we see Timur Radjabov playing in this game. And this is a totally resignable position.
It is. I certainly don't believe that it will be resigned.
No.
Especially after what we just saw last game. You definitely play out your moments here. And yeah, you can take this pawn. Knight C3 is also available, but I believe king takes C2 and king D1 or king B3 even are just fine.
Could a case be made that after king takes C2, Black wants bishop D7? The only chance might be to, attack the tender pawn on E3.
Yeah, I like that. No,
I think knight C3 is even more clinical to keep the king in contact with the E3 pawn. And then you can pick up the C2. But I'm pretty sure this pawn's a sitting duck. I don't know, Aman. Maybe it's a strength, but something tells me Radjabov won't be able to hold on to it.
Yeah, the thing is, I'm willing to bet that king takes C2, bishop D7, something like bishop C5, might just be like a very expedited way to trade things, and even at the cost of the E3 pawn, White is just going to then play king D2 and have the B2 pawn, the C5 pawn, they're going to join with the move B4, and two connected pass pawns rolling down the board. It's just so tough to deal with.
No, it's also completely winning. I agree. Radjabov instead trying to hunt for this bishop on A7. The problem is that after king D1, rook takes C1, knight takes C1, Black has no way of actually attacking this bishop. And on the next move, White's going to ensure that the rook is defended so that the bishop could move back to C5. And once all of that happens, then we could start talking about resignation.
And, the pawns are just arranged so perfectly on the king side as well.
Why is that necessary?
I mean, I gotta be honest, I understand it in a way that rook takes rook, everybody takes on C5, White plays king D2, let's say, a knight jumps to D4, and you've got this B pawn that just rolls. And none of Black's pieces have any play after that. So in that sense, I understand it, but the problem is that the alternative was so solid. So this is something I would land on if the other lines were a little bit murky and maybe not so sure.
Ooh. And I think Arjun might have missed this move.
I agree. This move might have come as a surprise to him, as he would be expecting bishop takes bishop. And I think White's advantage is very, very real there.
And I'm influenced by the eval bar. I admit it. Guilty as charged. But it's just the question of why are you giving up pawns unnecessarily? There was really no need to do that. You still had a passed B pawn in the other line.
Yeah.
Maybe he was worried about the pin along the A file. He's definitely missed the move knight D7. And the idea of this move is to keep the dark squared bishop alive. Black wants to take twice on C5, and suddenly the E3 pawn is going to be a major target in the absence of White's dark squared bishop. Black has, legitimate chances for the, which is totally unthinkable reality given what we saw 3 moves ago.
Yeah, this should never have been the case. Bishop F5 might even be a further step in the wrong direction. When it rains, it pours. Again, I understand a little bit why he did this, but I have no justification for this move when the alternatives are so solid, so sound, right? There were other moves, king D1, where you couldn't even find a single reason why that shouldn't be played. There was nothing wrong with it at all.
Very strange. And you know what else is disturbing is that from a psychological perspective, Radjabov was kind of dead in the water. He was tilted. He'd blundered. He was broken mentally. And all of a sudden, you give the guy a bone. Right now, I can guarantee you, Timur is thinking, oh my goodness, what did my opponent just do? I've got a serious chance to draw this game and end the match. And he's feeling hopeful. He's excited, perhaps about his prospects for the first time this game, even though objectively he's still getting tortured and he's still going to be miserable evaluationally speaking. But psychologically speaking, he's very much back into it.
No, it's I mean, there's a whole psychology to chess.
Whoa.
There's a game on the board and there's a game off the board. And I think right now, Radjabov is probably feeling as empowered as Arjun was feeling at the beginning of this game, fresh off the blunder from Radjabov in that previous game. You know, breathing new life into this match was Arjun, and now breathing new life into this game is Radjabov, who finally probably likes his position for the first time all game.
And I don't see an adequate response to the move Rook B8 off the top of my head. The issue is that both of these pawns I've highlighted are now, the B2 pawn is White's main asset, but it's also one of White's main weaknesses. It is an isolated pawn, and the king is currently occupied defending E3. So what is White going to defend the B2 pawn with in the event of Rook B8 is my question.
Yeah, I think I want to go Rook B1 and Rook B3, Knight C3. That's the best that I've got right now. So, you know, if you bring that Rook down, try to clamp the B2 pawn.
Right, let's pull up an analysis board.
Then I want to sit there with Knight C3 and protect it.
So you want to go here, and in the event of a check, you block it. This G4 pawn is so important defending the bishop. And I should point out, Amon, that this trade is not necessarily in Black's favor. Even though it optically ruins White's structure, the D5 pawn is now not sitting pretty. So keeping the bishop on E6 is integral, I think, to Black's defensive effort. Rook B8 is indeed on the board.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wonder here because I guess is there a way to... So first of all, if the Rook takes on B2 and White goes Rook A8, I was wondering how trustworthy that position is for Black having to play Bishop F8, but it looks like it's okay.
Looks like Black is surviving there, although with the knight coming to like D4 or F4 and putting pressure on the other bishop, it could potentially be very disturbing. Okay, Rook C1. Aiming to meet Rook B3 with Rook C3.
And Bishop E7, I mean, it does make a threat of the H4 pawn, but I'm not necessarily sure that's a pawn that White's going to be like bending over backwards to defend.
Probably not, especially if you can find a way to permanently solve the problem of the B pawn. I think Bishop E7 is Black's best chance, though. I think you have to try to, breathe some uncertainty into Arjun's mind. You got to make him start believing that he's screwing this up, which of course he is.
It's a very difficult task to make someone believe that they're doing what they're doing. But the thing in chess is like, even though he's messed it up from a much bigger advantage, he's still got an advantage. And objectively, if he had gotten to this position, if Arjun had arrived here with a slow, methodical advancing and improving of the initiative, he'd be feeling great. He's like, wow, this is a masterpiece. I'm completely crushing my opponent, and the momentum, the psychological game would be in a totally different state. But because he got here from what should have been probably game over, flat out, it probably feels like he's messed this up and his position is almost not as good as it really is.
I remember when I finished my last round game at the under 14 World Youth Chess Championship, I was really, really proud of it. It was one of those like long positional efforts. I thought I just played a brilliant game. I come out and my coach says, Daniel, if I were to show two diagrams after move 20 and after move 50, one would think this was the most brilliant game, the improvements that you made. But if you actually look at those 30 moves, there was basically nothing but mistakes, even though the end product looked impressive. So it kind of reminds, and of course I was upset. H5 in the meantime by Arjun, I think a lot of people are, making a WTF face. Rook takes B2. What is his idea? Is it to play check and back to C7?
Yeah, I think check might even yield like Bishop F8 because of potentially how annoying Rook C7 looks. But, Bishop F8 is just one of these permanent positions. Right? Black can't do anything.
Yeah, you can't defend D5. And if you just go hunting for the H pawn, then this is going to kill you at the end of the day. And if Black doesn't play Bishop F8, if Black plays King H7, then the F7 pawn is a serious weakness. But you could also get checkmated. C7, Bishop B4, and Rook D2 is mate. So it's not the end of the game here. It's actually a lot more double-edged than it appears.
No, that's a really good point. And
Bishop F6
actually,
play.
this is so compelling that Black didn't even take the pawn. He said Bishop F6 first. Let me put more pressure, so I have an option. I can take it with the bishop or the rook, depending.
Black can take it now. Black can also play the move d4 to damage White's structure and then take on b2. You have to weigh the pros and cons of that. Radjabov, instead, I think he is trying to set up d4. I think that's exactly what he's trying to do with the rook d8. He's not just trying to defend passively.
Right.
It's clear he's got an active idea. But could White play something like knight a4 to meet d4 with e4?
Yeah, I think the worst part about White's position right now is that d4 is a threat because of the knight. And if the knight wasn't there, we wouldn't be concerned about the move d4 probably at all. So I like the idea of moving the knight. And then if you do, the b2 pawn would be hanging. So, wow, what a decision to go for this. He's decided to say, look, I'm keeping my b pawn. You had your opportunity twice with two different pieces maybe to take it. You haven't done so. Now, I'm going to show you what it's really worth.
I also wouldn't be too dismissive of White's pawn structure. Yes, it's visually terrible, and I'm not exactly a staunch defender of the f5 pawn, but it is clamping down on Black's own pawns, right? These f5 and h5 pawns are preventing Black from creating more breathing room for his king. The f7 pawn could be a long-term weakness if Black's king tries to hide away on h7. So the situation on the king side is a little bit more double-edged than it seems. But the bigger question is, can Black permanently restrain the progress of the b pawn? And again, now Radjabov is on the defending side of the kind of endgame that Arjun had in game 2, where you've got a minute 30 and White can torture and squeeze this forever.
Yeah, all the pawns on light squares, dark square bishop on d4 just has, no authority on that side of the board.
Ooh.
I would have put the rook on b1 almost immediately, but
so with the Evo bar?
I was wondering, was he bothered at all by rook b5 and trying to take a whole bunch of pawns? Because there's one idea for Black, which is if I can get my hand on the majority of the kingside pawns, hey, I'll sack my bishop for your b pawn.
Yeah. Even if you just get one of the pawns, you should already consider a bishop sack, because those types of positions can be fortresses, especially with weakness on h5. Rook b5, I think, is on tap, and it's on deck if White allows it.
Yeah, bishop g1 is a nice move. The diagonal that the bishop wants to be on is so long, a7 and g1, you can't really control all the squares.
Yeah. It's geez, this is New York City to San Francisco. You got to control vast territory. And I think rook b5, Arjun.
Yeah.
Or maybe rook d8 and rook d5.
That would be quite a finesse, honestly.
Because Aman, if rook b5, he wants knight c5. I think Arjun has forgotten that the rook can circumvent the knight's defensive power, and he doesn't see it.
I was going to ask you what you thought about rook b5, knight c5, rook takes b4, fortress-wise.
Ooh.
Is that anything to ask about? Bishop versus rook, but the pawns are all cemented like this?
My gut is that that's losing, because there I actually would like the placement of the pawns. The fact that they're on light squares and holding Black's pawns back, I think would be an asset. f6, liquidating one of his weak pawns.
Yeah, it's a nice feeling, but it's also liberating for Black in a way as well.
Well, with every pawn that disappears, Black gets inches closer to the draw. Don't miss a fork on d7.
Yep, that's key here.
Rook g4, no, that doesn't work. Oh, knight d7 and rook g4.
Knight d7 and rook g4.
That
is exactly what our dear Silicon friend is looking for.
And the important thing to point out is that doesn't win a bishop. The problem is that it transitions to a rook endgame where Black's king is going to be on the h file.
Yep.
And Timur Radjabov fails to hold the position. I think rook g4 is still winning, although it's a little bit more complicated.
That's a much better move. That's a way better move than rook d8, I think.
Oh, totally.
Really like that.
I'm getting vibes from the previous game where you can get a knight versus bishop position, and Radjabov finds some way to trade the last pawn.
Yeah, one pawn at the end. Because here's the thing. look at the knight on d7 and look at the pawn advancing. Imagine the rooks are off the board. Not that hard to do because they're about to be traded. The pawn from b4 only has 2 squares so the bishop can sack, b6 and b8. And both those squares are covered by white's knight. So you might think the game is just over. And you'd be correct if he finds exactly how to do it. So really what we've got is very similar, as you said, to the last game. It could come down to a single move.
Oh, and what an amazing move by Arjun. He's so patient. I think what he's saying is, hey, this pawn, I can move it in 5 years from now. Right now, the top priority is to save the H-pawn to eliminate the risk of a fluke. And then later, when you get the king to g4, you'll bring the knight back and guide the pawn to promotion. g4 by Radjabov, a last-ditch attempt to trade as many pawns as possible.
Right.
What a move.
And I think you can just take and play knight, well, almost anywhere, I was going to say. Anywhere. Now you have the H-pawn and you have the B-pawn. Keep in mind, sometimes if all these pawns are off the board, you don't even need anything on the king side. Sometimes you just win with the B-pawn and the knight blocks that bishop from sacrificing.
That's a great way to put it. You could do that from c5. Last breaths here taken by Timur, but now he can no longer stop the H-pawn. It is over, and Arjun Erigaisi is going to win on demand.
Unbelievable.
This was not the smoothest conversion, but all credit to Arjun. I mean, to do what he just did against a player of Radjabov's caliber, and he takes a deep breath. I think Arjun can't even believe what has just happened. He has set himself up for an Armageddon game, which he has a realistic chance, Aman, of pulling off. I'm not exaggerating, perhaps the greatest comeback in the CGC inaugural season thus far.
Yeah, there's no way that this isn't the biggest, because sure, the score might not look that bad. It's like, oh, it was only 2-1. You came back a game. You won Armageddon. Great. This isn't like a 2-0 comeback. You have to think about how the match could have been over in one single move, a move that is probably replaying, at 2 times speed in Radjabov's head right now. And
G3,
I mean,
G3,
Arjun,
G3.
Exactly, G3. Arjun Erigaisi stayed in that game. He never quite gave up on it, even when some of his fans might have been thinking, oh, this is it. He's out of the tournament. He's very much still in this event and is now tied. And we have Armageddon coming up, Daniel.
We do indeed. We're going to set the players up. We will get their bids, and we will talk and remind you of the Armageddon format on the other side of the break. But ladies and gentlemen, go absolutely nowhere. We have one of the most exciting Armageddons in a long time coming up for you here at the Chess.com Global Championship. And we will set the players up and have the Armageddon for you in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned. We are back at the Chess.com Global Championship as we have a look at the bracket of the round of 16. We have one more match that is ongoing to determine the final 16. It is an epic match indeed. It is the match we are currently watching between Timur Radjabov and Arjun Erigaisi. And that match is currently tied 2-2. It will round off the Group E bracket. Oh my goodness. Grandmaster Von Hamilton. I mean, what haven't we seen in the CGC thus far? I mean, we've seen literally everything.
And I was gonna say we haven't seen one of the greatest comebacks, but I forgot that, of course, the round of 32 is not over yet. We have one more game. and naturally, they saved the best for last in terms of entertainment. Now, of course, it would be, a huge story if Arjun Erigaisi were to come back and win this Armageddon, thus winning the match, and the regret that would sink in for Radjabov having missed the opportunity to close this out would be immense. But having said that, Danya, I mean, Radjabov, I feel like now he's had time to cool down a little bit, and this is truly a different match. And we've always known Radjabov to be a professional. I think this is where he can show that.
This is absolutely where he can show that. We remind you of the Armageddon format. Both players bid up to 15 minutes. The side with the higher bid gets white with 15 minutes. The side with the lower bid gets the black pieces with the amount of time that they bid. Of course, black has draw odds, which means if the game ends in a draw, then black wins the match. The bids are Timur Radjabov, 14 minutes. Clearly, I wonder which side he wanted to play. And Arjun bidding 12 minutes and 30 seconds. So Radjabov will have 15 minutes. Arjun will have the black pieces with 12 and a half minutes. That's a pretty generous amount of time. We saw Vichy bidding 7 minutes. We've seen players bidding 11. 12 and a half is a boatload of time. I think this is a good start already for Arjun.
Yeah, indeed. But, from Radjabov's perspective, he's basically saying, I don't even want to play with the black pieces.
Or at all.
He's just like, okay, I'm going to bid 14 minutes because if you, for some reason, don't even want that much time, then okay, fine, I'll take it. But he really wanted to play with the white pieces here, and perhaps that's because he feels good about whether it's his preparation. He feels good about how the games have gone thus far. There have been some very combative games, and although we've had some draws, I feel like playing with the white pieces makes a lot of sense. And hey, he's up against 12 and a half minutes from Arjun, so a bit of a time edge to play into things.
And he's got another Rogozin repeating the opening from the first game. I think it's reasonable to assume that Arjun looked up the G4 shenanigans. And Timur Radjabov varying his choice, putting the bishop on f4. This is a line which just a couple of years ago was very rare, but has become a lot more popular as people have shifted away from the main lines in a lot of openings and have tried to get fresher, more unexplored positions. Rook is on c1 already. Just a sort of normal positional line. I don't think it's hard to make any qualitative observations here. It's just a line. Yeah. Just developing pieces.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think white needs to do anything spectacular here in order to... exactly. Like, you don't need to go crazy with moves like that. A3, in fact, he's because the rook's on c1, he's absolutely going to take back. Rook takes c3, and you can kind of forecast white's moves. You might need to retreat that rook. c7 is currently attacked. e3, maybe bishop e2, h3, castles, easy.
Yeah, I wonder where you've played those moves before. e3, bishop e2, and h3. What kind of system features those moves played in a row?
I thought of them right now for the first time ever. Came up with them at the board. Very unfamiliar territory to me.
Yeah, I mean, I actually like this choice by Radjabov. I think one thing that factors into his decision-making is the fact that this is likely, Aman, to lead to a long positional game, right? The structure is pretty closed. You're going to get a long maneuvering middle game, and that is exactly what you want if you're Timur, given your time advantage and given the fact that you want this game to extend. You want a 60-70 move affair. We remind you there is no increment in the Armageddon. As good of a bullet player as Arjun is, if you're down 5 minutes in a middle game with no increment, the clock basically becomes another piece. And rook on b3, quite a piece. That is. You don't see that every day in the opening. Rook c3 to b3.
What the heck is that move? I mean, I don't think you play rook b3 unless you've seen rook b3. And unless you've seen, some analysis you've done, some games where it's like, okay, yeah, sometimes it goes there. Otherwise, I mean, the move rook b3 just looks strange at first glance. One thing that I did want to point out is that if you brought the rook back to c1, there is this idea of, and I mean, it still exists, queen a5.
Yep.
And, you can mass trade everything. I'm not sure if that's what you want to do, but knight d2, you could trade everything on d2, go to an endgame. 2 bishops for white will speak volumes there, but still, there is an idea that the more pieces you trade in a solid structure like this, the closer you get to that draw, which is all Arjun needs to win this match.
Indeed. And interestingly, Timur didn't even seriously contemplate taking the pawn on b7. I think the eval bar did seriously contemplate it. But understandable. Radjabov doesn't want unnecessary tactical complications, especially given the way the last 2 games have gone. c5 by Arjun. I think Arjun's really the one trying to install tension on the board. But c5, from a positional standpoint, is an incredibly risky move, because if white consolidates, black could very well be left with a weak, isolated queen pawn. Add on to that white's bishop pair, and you could be talking about a serious positional advantage. So black really has to try to go after white's uncastled king, maybe go after the awkward rook to compensate for the positional disadvantages. Do you agree with that assessment?
No, all wrong. Yeah, none of it made any sense. No, that was really well said. The other thing that you can point out is that c5, the knight jumps in, and the rook is feeling a little weird. You might see this rook go on a real journey this game, Daniel, like rook b3, rook b4, rook. Yeah, exactly. No, it could get like almost like a game of Snake or something.
So what is Timur Radjabov deciding between? Well, castles is obviously a candidate move. D takes c5 and rook takes b7, I think, are the 3 big candidate moves. And the benefit of a move like c5 from Arjun is that Timur has to spend time on this decision. He can't just move instantly. This is a big moment. And he's got to try to prosecute this position carefully and accurately, because this is a chance for him to get an advantage. He chooses the calmest of the 3 moves, castles.
Mm-hmm.
And could the rook get trapped here? I don't know. Rook takes b7.
Okay, so rook b7. First of all, rook b7. Is it forced?
Well,
rook
you could sack the rook.
Rook b5 is a bit of a weird move.
But what is Arjun's idea? Because I think a lot of people might be saying, oh, queen c8 traps the rook. It doesn't even come close to trapping the rook, because the rook has a perfectly good parking spot on c7. Black lacks the dark squared bishop, so getting c7 under control is going to be hard. Okay, that's the idea.
I mean, it traps the rook, but it's so long term, right? Like h3, keep that bishop, and then you've always got c7.
It's like those Norwegian or Finnish prisons, or you've got high-speed internet connection, and you've got your own personal library and a nice desk. It's like, yes, not the worst accommodations on b7.
Exactly.
But of course, it's very nerve-wracking.
It is nerve-wracking. I think the one thing about if you think about what result is required for white, you are more interested in complications in general. So if you're offered a pawn, but you might get trapped, you're going to take it, because if you don't see it immediately, and at least you might have some compensation, even if it does get trapped, I think you're going for it, versus shying away and playing something that just doesn't have as much in it.
Mm-hmm. No, that's very well put. I think the move knight e5 appealed to me initially when I looked at the position. Of course, that does close off the bishop, and it makes queen c8 a more realistic possibility. But I was trying to figure out how to evaluate knight e5, queen c8, rook e7. And if you try to keep pursuing the rook and say, oh, 3-time repetition, no. White has knight c6 with a crushing initiative, rook c7 and knight e7. And talk about the rook taking a joyride. I think that's exactly what you have here.
And talk about Radjabov agreeing with you. Knight e5. Okay. Very, very fun looking move. And it's like, how can white use the squares in black's camp better than black? Right? How is white using e7 and c7 and b7 and c6? Like,
Crazy.
I thought this was black's position.
The positive thing for Arjun is that he's actually up on time. You would never guess that this is an Armageddon game. But the negative is, I think, that he's just worse. He's down a pawn. I don't see a way to continue pursuing the e7 rook effectively. I mean, maybe f6 to chase the knight away?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
f6 and...
Knight f6, g5 maybe.
Well, Actually, yeah.
Would be a pretty serious idea. I think bishop d6 there. Oh no, bishop d6, there's the knight on e4.
Yeah, so...
Wait up. What does white do?
What do you mean, what does white do, Daniel? This is your brilliant line.
Right, you got us into this mess to begin with, and now you're asking what to do? So if we pull up an analysis board, just to show what the danger is. f6, if you just play normally, knight f3, g5, bishop g3, black can force a repetition. Takes, whoop, and forget about bishop c8. I can just play queen c8 and force a repetition.
Yep. Draw your way to victory.
Arjun has decided to operate on the other flank. c3 is on the board.
Because now the bishop on e2, I mean, it in general, it joins the fight with, b5 and a6 available. So I'm not as concerned about the rook on e7 at all now. Now it's like if I solve c3 as a move, I'm feeling good about white's chances.
I agree. No, white's still up a pawn, still has all the positional pluses. I think Arjun's overall strategy here is totally understandable. He keeps trying to spin as much complication as possible, but eventually it's going to fizzle out. He doesn't have an endless supply of pawns and pieces that he could just shove forward.
Right. And queen d8, we've talked about your move, knight c6, still available.
Yeah, and with the c-file opening up, white is in prime position to put a rook there eventually. Uh-oh.
And not now. Let's not forget. Not rook c1 now.
No.
Worse move.
Highly inadvisable. Okay, f6, the eval bar didn't like. Where does the knight go? Do you even move the knight?
Yeah,
that's not a given in this position.
Exactly. Because if it's taken, the bishop takes, and, well, you're actually making serious threats there.
You know what could be an interesting resource is bishop f3 in this position. The whole point is that after black takes and white takes, later on down the line, rook c1 becomes a massive threat.
Mm-hmm.
So that's definitely on the table. Something like bishop f3 or even
I like
maybe
that.
Bishop d3.
I was even looking at something as ridiculous as bishop a6. But I think it's a little too much.
Far from ridiculous, though. Queen c3, queen c7, I can tell is your idea.
Yeah, but I can probably achieve this without the need to give out the bishop because, as you said, rook c1 is such a strong move. Like bishop h5, maybe, or something.
Yeah, but moving the bishop is critical because rook c1 fails, then knight takes e2 check. The queen is overloaded. We thank Chessbra for the raid.
There we go.
I assume Amon Hambleton was not streaming on Chessbra.
Yeah, no, just on the other monitor here.
Right.
I was just over there in Arena Kings,
2 simultaneous streams. Okay, f6 is on the board. Radjabov contemplating his next course of action. The +3 eval Amon is totally meaningless here. This is anybody's game.
Yeah.
4 results are possible, as you once said.
Exactly. That's an important thing to remember because I think this Armageddon is going differently than ones that we've seen in the past. This Armageddon is less about the time. I know white has less time. It's a crazy concept, right? Started with 2.5 minutes extra, but I think he's given up some of his time advantage because he's focused on the board. He's saying, look, I don't care about being up on time. It's less about that. I'm seeing a position that I think I can convert just looking at the way the game is playing out on the board, and I think he's just decided to focus on that. So I think the time is going to be critical, that Radjabov doesn't get too low, that he's not able to play things out properly. But I don't think he's focused on keeping that time edge and always staying up.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think he's looking at the position and trying to find the kill.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think we saw a lot of players treat the Armageddon game like it's a hyperbolic game, which it's not. It's still a rapid game. White still has 15 minutes. Yeah, there's no increment. You got to be a little bit faster, as you're saying, but 7:24 is an eternity on the clock for these players who are used to online blitz. Maybe Radjabov a little bit less so, but he's still a great blitz player. He's not feeling the time crunch just yet. So just to illuminate the idea of bishop f3, if black takes on e5, just so we're all on the same page, white plays bishop takes e5. Let's bring him an analysis board. Rook f7, trade, rook c1, and black is in huge trouble. Not because you can't defend the knight. You can defend it, but then you're going to end up dropping the pawn on d5 and black's position collapses.
Right.
Like takes.
And if you take on d5 here, because this is, it's enough material when you think about it, but white is probably just going to sit here and literally play like h3. And it's just like such a defeating move that next, queen a5, I mean, everything is falling. Black, ironically, does not have enough pawns. You need a pawn to anchor something. Your king, if you had a pawn on e6 or a pawn on b6, that would change the complexion here, but no, this is going to be too much. And we might see it, Dania, on the board.
We are seeing it. We have been calling a lot of these moves. This is on the board. I think if Radjabov takes and plays rook c1, he will be knocking on the door of a huge Armageddon victory. Unless Arjun has some sort of hidden resource here. Maybe knight b1 doesn't work either. Knight a4 is on the board. We're going to see that position.
And it's such a classy move to play at the end of a line. It's so easy to miss. You might be thinking about this whole line, bishop d5, knight d5. Imagine you're calculating from Arjun's perspective. You see all this. You see rook takes queen. And then at the end, you're like, wait a minute. I have a rook in 2 pieces for the queen. Maybe I have back rank tricks. And white just plays h3. And you're like, oh, okay. This is really annoying. Now there's no threat to white's king. The queen runs rampant into position. And don't forget, white has the f pawn, the e pawn, the d pawn, 3 pawns connected as well. It's just winning.
The material plays a role, but ultimately it's the total lack of king safety. It's the discombobulated nature of black's minor pieces that are totally scattered. They can't coordinate. And the fact that white's got not just 3 pawns, but 3 pawns in the center. You have this idea of playing f3, e4, and d5. Timur needs to cut some time here and just grab that pawn on d5. He needs to trust his intuition here. The one way that you fail to win this with white is you get inside your own head, you take too long on the obvious decisions, and we saw what that leads to in game 3.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. He's giving a one last double check because I think he feels after bishop d5 that knight takes d5 is so winning for him. So he might even be looking at like king g6, just making sure he's got all the bases covered. But of course, white just takes in the corner and can even look to sacrifice.
And I think one line you had to double check after bishop takes 8 is the move knight e2 check. Looks very scary, but white can just recapture on e2. I won't make these moves because I think, let's focus on the game continuation. But at the end of the line, white covers the back rank check with queen f1, and he's just up 3 pawns.
Exactly.
Timur just making sure of that, making sure that he's not blundering any tactics. But bishop f3, probably even better because d5 is totally unstoppable. What a classy move.
Yeah, that's just, he's sitting back with his, 5.5 minutes, which is an eternity in a position like this, and saying, you don't have a single move. Check that rook on a8. Trapped. Can't move. Actually cannot move. Rook b8 only offers further material. And, the most decapitating thing is maybe after rook b8, you don't even take it.
No, it's totally debilitating. And bishop g4 by Arjun, an attempt to stir things up. I think the time is ripe to take on a8.
Yeah. Now he's baited the bishop to g4. It'll fall victim to the move h3. Pure genius on the board by Radjabov. But in all seriousness, I think that's the idea.
Timur just has to realize that after bishop takes 8, I'll make the moves really quickly just to make sure, again, we're on the same page. Knight e2, queen takes e2. It does look scary. Oh, queen c1. There's like knight c3, knight e2. But all of that is ghosts, right? Because the knight is not on c3. It's on a4. And that one tempo gives white the time to go on the offensive and forget that white's up 2 pawns. He's just going to checkmate the black king after something like bishop e6, d5. All the bases are covered.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, even before queen c4 check in this line, it's just the move h3. I see this move h3 in every line, and I'm like, that's enough. That's enough for me to be like, okay, we're totally fine.
No, this is if Arjun pulls this off, I will have literally nothing to say for the rest of the CGC.
Yeah, I mean, if he pulls this off, I mean, what can we say? He certainly deserves to be there because Radjabov will have had everything in front of him, all the chances. One position that could get, I mean, even this isn't enough, but could get a little bit weird is, h3, bishop e2, followed by knight c3. And Black is just trying to make this strange claim that I've trapped your own queen. I can't attack it. I can't move any of my pieces, but I've trapped your own queen inside your position.
Timur's obviously nervous here, and when you get anxious and there's as much on the line as there is this game, it's the same effect as you watch a horror movie and then every sound in your house makes you jump. It's the same thing here where you're blowing up the enemy to insane proportions. Every move looks scary. Every fork seems like the end. So Radjabov has to stay calm. Most important thing, keep time on your clock. Don't let Arjun flag you. Don't forget that there's no increment because Arjun is going to pull out all the stops. You just know it.
Mm-hmm.
What a move by Timur.
It's great. Knight
King.
to e2 check, and the king
G3.
takes a journey to f2. Right, you've got so many extra pawns. I would give, 2 pawns here just to maybe, trade the queens because you know that your winning chances are still so high. But Black can't even get 2 pawns.
Nope. And Black can't even get the position into some opposite-colored bishop endgame. He's simply getting mated.
Yeah. Yeah, if you don't trade queens here, that's checkmate on the board. Let's not forget that White is threatening probably something like a checkmate in, 4 or 5 if it was his turn, for example.
Yep.
Knight e2 check, king f2, and strangely enough, every single piece that Black has is hanging.
The queen, the pawn on g7 is hanging.
Yeah.
The bishop. It's over. If knight e2, king f2, and you trade queens, that's where the 2 minor pieces hanging is what actually causes the position to be resignable. Knight d1, last chance by Arjun.
That's right.
Take the queen and take on e3, I think he wants.
Gotta try that.
Does White have king e2 here?
I know, I was about to say, does White just have, a real calculated move? King e2, how cruel.
And then you go to d3, bishop f5 looks scary, but you just block it with one of
No, there's no way. There's no way. How do you do that? Because king g3 is probably enough.
Oh, totally. How many of us would just play king g3, rest on your laurels, get the king out of the danger zone? Radjabov takes a dip into the Mariana Trench again. And he's going to live to tell the tale. It's
unbelievable because in the line with king g3, g7 is hanging. So, everything is so good in that line, but that's just a cruel move, king e2. He is going to win this game.
That's it. I mean, bishop just take g7, d5. Literally, even an opposite-colored bishop endgame is completely winning here.
Yeah.
The only way you screw this up is, again, by blundering a fork or some
full
sort of
fork,
cataclysmic occurrence.
d5, for example, hitting the knight. Bishop b5 check. King f2. Knight d3.
I'm closing my eyes. If Arjun plays bishop b5, whoa!
Well, because king d2, knight c4, and it's winning, but it's opposite bishops.
It's opposite. Actually, if I'm Radjabov, you have to watch for bishop f1, though.
Yeah,
okay,
g3, king e3. That's 3 connected pass pawns, and you have to feel it's sufficient.
It must be. You just push the pawns. The kryptonite for opposite-colored bishops is connected passers, because you can use your king and bishop to push them through a defensive barrier. And Radjabov is going to convert this. He's got plenty of time.
Yeah, he's got too much time, honestly.
Way too much time. And after I think Arjun's going to resign in 1 or 2 more moves.
Yeah, this won't last long because the king gets to e5. And I know we're kind of in the closing segments here, but I will just point out that although this is absolutely routine for these guys, the way that he's advancing the pawns is so crucial. You advance the pawns on light squares, and then you put them side by side, and when you advance them again, they go on light squares. So you don't play pawn to e7, you play pawn to d7, and that is enough to take victory in this Armageddon game, Danya. And what a comeback. I call it a comeback because mentally I feel like Radjabov came back in this match to win what should have been his in the first place.
Chess is a cruel game. There's always going to be someone who's euphoric and someone who's devastated. But we got to make it clear. Chess is an effort between 2 games, right? It's an artwork that's produced by 2 people. And Arjun Erigaisi played an integral role in this match being as exciting as it was. The way that he fought in the second game. The way that he fought in the third game and pulled off a miracle. And of course, an on-demand victory in game 4. It was only because, as you said, Timur Radjabov was able to gather himself and survive some unbelievable tension in the Armageddon game that the match doesn't go his way. What a match we just saw. This was an absolute treat.
Yeah, this was tremendous. What a victory from Radjabov, who also, credit to him, he bid 14 minutes. He was like, honestly, give me the white pieces. That's what that bid says. He wanted the white pieces. He liked how things were going in this match. Really, really bold decision to go for that. And it paid off. He honestly has had some really exciting games with the white pieces against Arjun in this match out of all of them. But Rook B3, Daniel, I go back to that and I'm thinking, interesting move, interesting prep. And that Rook actually shaped the entire game. Rook B3, Rook B7. The Rook went to E7. I don't know how it stayed alive, but that shaped how this entire game went.
It really did. I think this was actually the turning point. Like, Arjun had the opportunity to defend the B7 pawn. He could have played B6. He could have played B5 and knight B6, knight C4. I think this would have been the most prudent option. Instead, he decides to sacrifice B7. It's a fearless call. It's a gutsy call. We can't criticize him for that. Arjun did everything in his power to make sure this game went his way. But the precision with which Timur Radjabov handled this stage of the game, Bishop F3 Aman, is nothing short of amazing. And then a little bit later, how many of us would just take on A8? No, Bishop F3. The patience he had in this stretch is incredible. And the conversion was clean and impeccable.
Yeah, that's just a perfect summary. Radjabov, a totally deserved winner, but Arjun Erigaisi almost made that full comeback, making Radjabov regret his previous game immensely. As we see that final score, it went all the way to Armageddon. Erigaisi, down 1.5, came back to draw a dead loss position and then win on demand in game 4 to make for one of the most exciting matches in the round of 32. And it does mean that Timur Radjabov wins an Armageddon, Daniel, moves on to the round of 16.
Yeah, he is the last one, the lucky one. He rounds off the final group of 16, and he rounds off the final unfinished bracket. The Group E bracket is now complete. That means all of the brackets are now complete. Well, 16 players will not be going to Toronto. 8 players will be going to Toronto at the start of November. And there are going to be some incredibly fascinating matches that are coming up, but we will tell you about them after the break. First, we have an interview with Mr. Radjabov, the hero of today's match. So don't go anywhere. We are going to ask Timur for his thoughts on his fascinating match, his mental toughness. And first, we're going to set him up. So, ladies and gentlemen, we hope you enjoyed the match. Stay tuned for an interview with Radjabov here at the CGC, the Chess.com Global Championship. We will be back in just a couple of short minutes. We are back at the Chess.com Global Championship reviewing the results of the final unfinished bracket that is now finished. And it is Timur Radjabov who survives an incredible comeback attempt by Arjun Erigaisi, demonstrating nerves of steel and playing a brilliant Armageddon game to make his way to the round of 16, where he will challenge none other than Jan Nepomniachtchi to determine who books a ticket to Toronto. And the best news is that we have Timur in the studio for an interview. Timur, thank you for joining us after such a long and arduous match. Let's start with the Armageddon. What did you tell yourself to calm yourself down going to the Armageddon? How were you able to stay so focused and so centered after what happened in games 3 and 4?
Well, honestly, I don't think that I've played a good game, the one that was the Armageddon, and my beat was like something like 14 minutes, and I think that was pretty close to 15. So I'm an old guy, I need more time. And he decided 12 minutes and 30 seconds is enough probably to hold as black. But then I think we've got some crazy position out of the opening, and yeah, it was actually hard after that white game that I didn't win, and just to secure the match. Yeah, it was hard to come emotionally back to the normal state. And yeah, I couldn't even play properly the fourth game. I think that I've played a bad game there, just really bad game. I mean, just like all the moves were bad, I think. And yeah, in Armageddon, I don't know, I just thought I have to fight, and I have to find some moves not to allow any direct draws. So that's why I decided for the sharp line with the cd d5 and bishop f4, and was a bit surprised that he didn't go for the long lines with this knight e4, g5 stuff, knight c6 and so on, and was quite happy about it because the position is playable. And then I don't know what was happening. It was completely crazy, and I was super happy when I found out that bishop a8, knight e2 stuff works. I mean, queen e2, queen f1, and so then of course I'm having like 3 pawns up and 2 bishops and all that stuff, and still I was quite afraid to not to win the game, because I've missed such a chance in a third game. Yeah, but okay, that's life.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good summary. I also wanted to ask you about the Armageddon. This move rook b3, was this like something you had prepared? I mean, we don't always see a rook end up on b3. You were critical maybe about how you played the game, but it honestly looked like rook b3 gave you very dynamic chances, and it's an Armageddon game you need to win. Was rook b3 part of that prep a little bit, or something you'd looked at?
No. I just saw that I can play rook c1, queen a5, knight d2, and then go f3, and probably I'm having a slightly better endgame. Mm-hmm. I mean, in case he takes on d2, he takes on d2, I take with the king. I'm having 2 bishops and a good endgame. But actually, after rook c1, I was afraid of queen b6, so I tried to find some moves not to allow any direct, any direct draw for him. So yeah, rook b3 just no, it's not the preparation, to be honest. I don't even know what the series says there, but just seemed natural to me to go rook b3, not to allow queen b6 in this position. And yeah, still after queen a5, I'm going knight d2. I don't know what this line is, in fact, but. I was quite surprised that he really sacrificed everything so fast. I mean, he could play probably some more positional way in this position after rook b3, because the rook is kind of awkward there. So probably he can even go some b6, knight d7, and c5 or something like this. But okay, I didn't really care, because I just wanted to seek any chances and have any kind of playable position. And anyway, I mean, the loss and the draw is the same thing there, so I didn't care much.
Timur, Arjun Erigaisi, your opponent today, is part of a group of very impressive players from the young generation. Of course, Gukesh, Abdusatorov. Do you feel like those players, this new generation, has clearly defined weaknesses? And was there a particular direction that you were trying to take these games in order to exploit what you perceive to be Arjun's biggest weaknesses?
Well, I didn't really study too many of their games, to be honest, all these youngsters. I'm more used to study, all these candidate guys. And certainly, I mean, the 10 Indian teams can win the Olympiad or something like this. And, the second team was what's like bronze medalists. They were bronze medalists or silver in the last Olympiad?
And it was bronze.
Bronze.
Bronze, yeah. But still, I mean, they were leading throughout the tournament, and, they have so many strong youngsters. You can mention Prague, Gukesh, all these guys, and of course Erigaisi. I think they're just playing great chess nowadays, and they work very hard with the youngsters. I think the Indian, I don't know, Chess Federation is it, or anyone who is responsible for Indian chess. So they have a lot of training sessions and so on. I didn't really specifically do something for Erigaisi in terms of preparation, but I saw that during the match he was kind of slightly uncomfortable with the way I was playing. I think he didn't expect me to go this G4 line, and probably I could seek some chances in the first game as well. I think I've just played this Rook G5 stupidly with D5 idea, and then he probably did some mistakes, and I settled for a draw. But I think in the second game I just felt that he's kind of uncomfortable in playing some kind of simple positions, and he really played badly, I think, in the second game when he was white. I think he could just draw it. After Queen B6, C5, I think there are many ways for white to be fine, but then he found himself into trouble, and then I managed to win the game. Yeah, I didn't do any special preparation, to be honest, so I don't really have any secrets to tell you how to beat Erigaisi or any other Indian youngster. But probably to retain some energy is good. So I didn't do much at all before the match, and try to relax as much as I can, because I thought it will be anyway kind of tense, and it was.
Yeah, indeed, a really tense match, which you ended up emerging victorious. We're going to bring up for everybody here the bracket, which is now the round of 16. You've advanced, Timur, and your opponent, we mentioned earlier, is going to be Jan Nepomniachtchi. Any thoughts on Jan as an opponent, obviously? And did you see some of his matches? He's had some pretty exciting ones, like especially against Fiddler last round.
No, didn't really follow, but I know Jan for a long time, and I've seen him for around 3 or 4 weeks in June. So that was quite enough, and I didn't study more of his games in the candidates, of course. So, I know the guy. He's a very strong rapid and blitz player, and of course the classical chess as well, but rapid and blitz, I think he's famous for that. And just very happy to qualify through this match today, and it took a lot of nerves. Even though I'm always, convincing myself that on lines you should not really care too much. But then once it starts, it's sometimes more tense than the classical games that you were playing. But certainly, of course, I know Jan quite well, and we had different results in online games with him. So, let's see what happens. I'll be happy to play an interesting match against him, of course.
We'll be watching that match very closely. Timur, thank you so much for joining us for the interview. We will let you take your well-deserved rest. Good luck against Jan.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Thanks.
Oof. Okay, wow. Aman. And then there were 16.
Yeah.
There were 16. Where did the 128 players go? Where did the 64 go? Where did the 32
Amazing.
Go?
Yeah, we whittled it down. We finally know the entire bracket. That's the most exciting part. As we have every matchup here, every pairing, as you can see them there on your screen. Radjabov in the top right-hand corner, filling out the last name in this bracket. And we're getting so close to knowing who the participants are going to be in Toronto for the finals.
And you heard Timur basically saying that you're supposed to not care about online chess as much, but when you're sitting there and there's 15,000 people watching you on all the platforms, and that a ticket to Toronto, Canada, and a check for $200,000 is on the line, you're feeling a little bit nervous, maybe even more nervous than the final game at the candidates tournament. And that is a testament to how awesome the CGC is. These players, no matter how calm they are on the outside, and Radjabov is pretty damn calm, they are eating themselves out on the inside, especially after a near choke. This was an epic match, and you will want to acquaint yourself, ladies and gentlemen, with everybody on that bracket. Some incredibly fascinating matches coming your way, starting with this Sunday, October the 2nd. We will have 2 matches for you, Wesley So against Jeffrey Zhang, and another All-American matchup, Levon Aronian against Samuel Sevian. Aman, you cannot ask for 2 matches that are... It's not possible to produce 2 pairs that are more entertaining than that.
No, these are the 4 players, and these are the pairings. But seriously, I actually have Wesley in my mind. Wesley from the very start, one of my favorites to go all the way in this tournament. So I think I'll definitely have my eyes on that match. Jeffrey Zhang is such a competitor, so resilient. You're never going to see a match with Jeffrey finish 3-0, 4-0. He always gets points on the board, and Wesley has been so consistent in the match format. Talk about a single game, sure, but Wesley in a match format, I feel that he always has some way that he comes out on top. So I'll be looking at that match. Wesley is one of my favorites to go the distance. And of course, Aronian and Samsevian, you have this All-American day for the two matchups. So we're whittling down the Americans left in the competition. We'll see how many of them make it to the top 8.
And speaking of Americans and speaking of more epic matches, the following day on Monday, the Sunday matches are coming your way at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. On Monday, 3 hours earlier at 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern, we will have 2 other matches in the round of 16. Hikaru Nakamura against Lenier Dominguez, a classic matchup throughout the years. They have played so many times across the board in Blitz and in Rapid, and they will face off once again to determine who heads to Toronto. And Fabiano Caruana, who has really resurged in the CGC, he has proven that, yeah, he's had some tough performances, but he is still freaking Fabiano Caruana. But Dmitry Andreikin, Aman, that match stands out to me because Andreikin has been a totally unstoppable force in the CGC. Everywhere, everything he has touched has turned into gold on the chessboard, and his opponents have turned into dust. Are you as excited about that match as I am?
I absolutely am. If we pay attention to the last couple slides as well, I think chess fans will notice that the United States Olympiad team has just appeared, right? In the last slide and in this slide, there's your Olympiad team. Some of the best 4 or 5 players in the entire country are still in this competition and looking to advance. I look at Caruana Andreikin as the sort of the matchup that draws my attention between the two of them, because Andreikin has had so much success, so much underrated success. I mean, he's a 2,700 player. He hasn't broken into that 2780 echelon of like top players in the world, but he's right there. And I feel like in this shorter time control, he is in that top 10 player in the world conversation. So Fabiano Caruana, he's had some shaky moments qualifying thus far in the competition. I look at this match as a total toss-up, but Andreikin, dark horse, really, really dangerous in this format, the match format, the rapid as well. So I think Andreikin right here is as a guy to keep an eye on. And on the other side, Daniel, we have Naka and Dominguez. Sort of a much different matchup. Actually, I think Naka comes in as a certified favorite for sure, but he also has had kind of ups and downs when it comes to qualifying. He's crushed some matches, as we expect Nakamura to, but he's also had some shaky moments. And Dominguez has this style where, if you give him an opportunity, he will take it and pounce immediately. He's so good at converting, jumping on mistakes. And I feel like Nakamura, if he plays one of his, vintage Nakamura style matches, I think he's got this. But if he slips up anywhere, Dominguez will be right there to surgically take advantage of whatever he's given.
There's 8 players who will contest matches on Sunday and Monday, and all 8 of them, you could make a case for them winning the CGC. You could certainly make a case for them booking their ticket to Toronto. The top 8 players will head to Toronto at the start of November. It's going to be an epic finale. We've got 16 players remaining, and by Monday, 4 of them will be eliminated. Yep. Oh my land, Zaman. And another match is in the books. We have concluded the round of 32, and what a way to conclude it was. Let me pass the mic to you one last time before I wrap up for your final thoughts. This seemed to be all about psychology today, and that is why these matches are so exciting. There's so many different dimensions to them, aren't there?
Completely agree. There's a couple matches happening. When we said we had one match today, we meant officially, because there was on the board, off the board, the psychology, the mentality, and of course the momentum. The momentum, I feel, was dictating this match. It started off with some really interesting prep from Radjabov, and then in the second game, it was actually Arjun who said, no, I'm not taking early draw. Let's play this game out. I've got some ideas here, and flipped on its head as Radjabov completely outplayed him. And honestly, that momentum carried into the third game. It looked like he was going to walk away with this match. So well calculated, so well executed, but a final trick and a reminder not to count anyone out in this competition, literally until you see the result on the board, as Arjun came back, gave us a game 4. I think the fans were just clamoring with excitement that we got to see more of this match. And ultimately, it came down to an Armageddon, Danya, where I think Radjabov recomposed himself after Arjun won on demand in game 4. And I think he played a tremendous game. I don't think he gave himself enough credit for how well he played in the Armageddon.
He most certainly did not. That was an excellent summary and a great note for us to, unfortunately, wrap up. But once again, you do not have to wait long. The next set of matches are coming your way Sunday at noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, and 6 p.m. Central European Standard Time. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, we wish you a great rest of your Wednesday. We'd like to thank everybody in the chat. Chat was happened tonight, this afternoon on
in Central
Twitch.
European time.
On Central, of course, that's what I meant. On YouTube and on Twitch. So we'd like to thank you for supporting your favorite player and making the CGC a magical event that it has been. Thank you also to our producer, Matt, for another excellent broadcast, our entire amazing team at chess.com. And thanks to you, Aman. It is always a pleasure to commentate with you. But now, ladies and gentlemen, from the chess.com Global Championship from the round of 32, which has now concluded, Grandmaster Mon Hamilton and Grandmaster Daniel Naroditsky bidding you a great rest of your Wednesday. We'll see you soon.